Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of ACITA's online national meeting. The feedback we received from last week's part 1 meeting was really exceptional, so a big thank you to all those who took the time to contact Kevin and myself. We are really glad to know that we are delivering what you guys are wanting. And, then I look at today's agenda and I'm amazed at how engaged all the major players are. I mean, government, this industry, parliament, the civil servants, have all become so engaged in making this work. Despite the size of the incredibly daunting task we are all facing, it does feel like a combined effort, which realistically is the only way we are going to succeed. My concerns do, however, remain. We are trying to do too much at the same time. Industry is constantly having to adjust to a very fluid and moving timetable. Let's take an example of maybe a pet food manufacturer that was preparing by adjusting processes and training staff to meet the published new regulatory requirement from the 1st of April. They've been first to redeploy that staff that they were training and adjust their planning to the 1st of October. And they're doing this while considering that they could be the ideal business candidate or type for manufacturing the recently announced free ports. At the same time, the movements of their products into Northern Ireland have been restricted because of the composite nature of their goods. At the same time, their clearance capability has been restricted by the absence of a bulk upload facility into TSS and by TSS's restrictions to prevent the effective appointing of a specialist customs intermediary to handle this mandatory requirement on their behalf. There are also concerns over their medium to long-term planning because of the uncertainty over the permanent establishment requirement in Northern Ireland under the TCA. And that's just one industry. Each industry sector has their own unique challenges. And all are relying on the advice of a customs intermediary sector that has been stretched to the limits and is in itself trying to interpret this constantly evolving situation. Certainty is what this industry is seeking, and the sooner we are working to fixed agreed goals, the better. We as an association are therefore extremely grateful to the contributors and subject matter experts who attend our events and share their knowledge and expertise with our membership. It does feel like ACITA members have the edge and that advantage. Kevin, if I could have the agenda slide, please. Today's agenda is again exceptional. A former head of UK Border Force, a former Director of Customs Transformation at HMRC, continued and great support from TSS, again participation from the Republic of Ireland Revenue Services, and one of ACITA's favourite senior HMRC experts on Northern Ireland. As usual, we will all walk away from the session better informed and better equipped than we were when we arrived. So big thank you to our panel. Your participation is sincerely appreciated. Today's proceedings will follow the same format as always. At the end of each session, I will facilitate questions with each of the speakers. So please put any questions you have in the chat facility. Anything that is not answered because of time constraints will be collected by Kevin and put to the speakers afterwards, with the answers, as usual, being published on the website. And before I go, we are planning an extra session specifically on transit movements of goods to and from Northern Ireland early next week. All the major players will be involved in the session, and as this will appeal to a smaller and specifically focused group, this will be a completely interactive session. Please watch the website for details and contact Kevin if you want to be involved. And I would also like to observe the 60-second silence that has been called for at midday today to show respect to everyone we have lost during the pandemic and to support those who are in mourning. So Tony and Kevin, I hope you don't mind me interrupting your session at 12 o'clock to observe this. But I suppose that's more than enough from me for now. So without further ado, may I please introduce you to one of ACITA's favourite speakers, Ellie Patterson from the Northern Ireland Stakeholder Engagement Team. Ellie, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Des, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for making space on this agenda for me to present to you and share some updates with you on some changes to some of the easements that HMRC has for goods movements into Northern Ireland. I'm not going to cover a lot of this in detail because you have Shankar and the team from TSS directly after me, who will go through a lot more of the the detailed processes for declarations into Northern Ireland. So I'm just going to cover an update on some of the temporary positions we have for goods movements into Northern Ireland. And they will cover two principal areas around parcels movements and the UK trader scheme, but I'll also mention a couple of other recent changes that we have made. So the first one is to update on the position for parcels movements into Northern Ireland. So this is about goods coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland as parcels moved by express operators and the Royal Mail Group. We had an easement in place from the 1st of January that meant in the majority of cases, parcels going into Northern Ireland do not currently require a customs declaration. That easement had been due to end at the end of March, but it has now been extended. So that will remain in place to allow the sector further time in which to adapt to the new requirements and to put processes in place to make declarations in the future. So there's a couple of areas within that easement that is probably worth just drawing out. At the moment, the easement applies to all parcel movements with the exception of goods that are subject to prohibitions and restrictions. These goods need a customs declaration in all cases when moved into Northern Ireland. Where the parcel movement is a business to business parcel movement and the value of the parcel is over £135, there is currently a delayed declaration requirement that the business recipient of the parcel will need to comply with. The TSS will be launching a service for business recipients of parcels to do that in due course. So at the moment, they're not asked to do that declaration immediately. They need to just retain the details and information about the parcel that they have received in order that they can do that later on once that service comes online. In other cases under the current easement, there's no declaration requirement. One of the changes that we made in the latest update to the process is previously goods that are subject to excise duty were counted amongst those goods that did require a declaration in all instances. In the latest change to the processes, we have included excise goods under the same provisions that apply to standard goods, so non-controlled goods. So excise goods only now need to have a declaration if they are received by a business and the value of the parcel is over £135, in which case they'll be subject to the same delayed declaration process as applies to other parcels received by businesses valued over £135. So that is a further support for the industry and will make the movement of excise goods into Northern Ireland simpler during the easement period. So there's also a couple of deadlines in terms of the easement periods that it's worth just going through as well. So the easement period for business to business parcel movements is due to come to an end on the 1st of October. So that's a fixed deadline that has been put in place. So at the moment, both business senders of parcels and express operators are working towards the 1st of October as the date for declarations to come into force for all of those parcel movements, and the declaration would then need to be at the time that the parcel moves in, as would be normal. The position for customer to customer parcels or business to consumer parcels is slightly different. We've got a longer timescale on that, reflecting that is the bulk of parcel movements into Northern Ireland, and therefore the timescales for readiness are longer. So we have committed to giving 6 months from the time that guidance is published, so that industry as a whole has plenty of time to adapt to those requirements and put the necessary systems and processes in place. So during the easement period, HMRC is working with both parcel operators, but also the retail sector on what this will mean to them going forwards, and to help them work through the challenges, not only about systems readiness, but also one of the key things will be working through how the things like the not at risk declaration process can work for parcel movements into Northern Ireland, and other elements like that, where we can look at how best to mitigate the impact of tariffs on these goods. So there's quite a lot of work to be done during the easement period on all of that. The second part I wanted to cover is the UK trader scheme. So this is the scheme under which businesses can declare goods entering Northern Ireland are not at risk. It is an authorisation process. A business wanting to use the UK trader scheme has to be authorised by HMRC in order to use that scheme. We have seen a good number of businesses already being authorised, but I think we are keen that businesses really understand the utility of the scheme and consider authorisation if that might be helpful to them. One of the key easements that we have with that scheme at the moment is around the fixed place of business requirement. So there is an eligibility criteria for the UK Trader Scheme, in that a business either has to be established in Northern Ireland, or if it isn't established in Northern Ireland, it must have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland, plus have indirect customs representation in Northern Ireland and customs processes carried out in the United Kingdom. We have a current easement in place around the fixed place of business requirement, which means that a business who is not established in Northern Ireland and doesn't currently have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland can use the scheme on a temporary basis, and that temporary basis has now been extended to the 1st of November. And so that time has been extended to allow businesses further time to adapt to the new requirements and to consider their supply chains and how their businesses operate, and consider whether there's another way they might want to look at using the UK Trader Scheme going forwards. Again, HMRC will be doing extensive engagement during the easement period to help and support businesses through that process. So that extension to the easement has meant that the UK Trader Scheme might have more utility for businesses who don't have a fixed place business in Northern Ireland, who perhaps might up to this point have not considered it to be particularly important for them or particularly relevant for them. And so we would encourage businesses who haven't yet thought about applying for the UK Trader Scheme to really reconsider that in the light of the extension to that easement. The other option that we have made available much more recently as well is around an apportionment approach to declaring goods not at risk under the UK Trader Scheme. So up to this point, our guidance has focused around, if you want to declare goods at risk, you must be able to identify and demonstrate that those goods are going into Northern Ireland for one of the permitted purposes, so for sale to final consumers in Northern Ireland or for end business use in Northern Ireland. The apportionment approach caters for businesses such as the wholesale sector is a good example of this, where they bring in a variety of goods which could be sold either to a business in Northern Ireland or to a business customer in the Republic of Ireland or in the EU. And so they don't know specifically which goods are going to which customer at the time they enter Northern Ireland, but they know a proportion will go to either. So an apportionment approach allows businesses with a stable trading pattern to declare goods not at risk on the basis of that stable trading pattern. And I emphasize stable trading pattern because this, when we looked at the scope of what we could make available in this space, the legal cover we have to offer this does mean that it does need to be on that basis where a business has a predictable trading pattern and can therefore make a good assessment of the percentage of the business which would be with customers in Northern Ireland and the percentage of their business that would be going into the EU, and declare on that basis. They will need to keep records and other evidence to support the apportionment that's made going forwards. And then we will be issuing further guidance on this and around how a business who makes a declaration based on an apportionment approach, but then perhaps later needs to revisit it because their business has unexpectedly changed, how they would go about doing that. So there is more guidance to follow on this, but again, the apportionment approach becoming available might mean that the UK Trader Scheme is more available to some businesses who up to this point hadn't thought it was suitable for them. So again, we would encourage people to kind of look again at the options and see whether the UK Trader Scheme might be of benefit to them under this new approach. We're also looking at the guidance around the UK Trader Scheme and how we can make that more work better for businesses. One of the areas that I've seen quite a lot of queries is from businesses involved in manufacturing and the processing sectors, where they're in a business and they're in a type of business that doesn't come within one of the approved processing sectors under the UK Trader Scheme, which would allow them to declare the goods that they bring into Northern Ireland for processing purposes as not at risk. However, they can still declare goods that they use for bring in for their own use as not at risk under the UK Trader Scheme. And this is something we're trying to draw out in the guidance a little bit more, so businesses understand that even if they are a processing business, but they're not within one of those approved processing sectors, there is an option to use the UK trader scheme for goods that they bring in for their own use. So this might include things like plant and machinery for use in their own factory that can be brought in not under the processing criteria, but under the other part of the UK trader scheme approach, which allows you to bring goods in that are going for the business's own use in Northern Ireland. So again, we want to help make the guidance more accessible in that sense, so that businesses really kind of understand and are able to use the UK trader scheme in that sense to declare goods not at risk. So those are the areas I wanted to cover on kind of those particular easements. I think just two other areas of guidance just to mention for information. One linking to the fact that there's you have a session on transit coming up in the not too distant future. We have recently published, in fact, just yesterday, published additional guidance around the position for starting and ending transit movements at the Office of Departure and Destination in Northern Ireland. Up to this point, we've had a process in place whereby the details of the transit movement were emailed in to Border Force at the Office of Departure Destination, and then they would clear the transit movement remotely and only call in trucks for a physical check where that was required. That was a temporary approach, recognising the need to kind of support trade in the early time after the end of the transition period. That temporary period is coming to an end, and we've just published guidance that from the 5th of April, if you are using the Office of Departure or Destination in Northern Ireland, you will need to physically present the goods in all cases. So the truck will actually have to report to the Office of Departure or Destination to have a transit movement started or ended. So that is slightly changing the current approach that some businesses had been taking advantage of. The last thing I will mention, and then I'll stop for questions, is around use of chief in Northern Ireland. So you'll probably be aware that we have on a temporary basis made chief available for rest of world imports and exports to and from Northern Ireland. Again, this is about supporting businesses while we transition towards full use of CDS for Northern Ireland. CDS is already mandatory for GB to NI goods flows. So chief has been made available for that since the beginning of the year. The bit of the guidance that has only just been published is around if the goods are at risk under the at-risk determination when imported into Northern Ireland. Chief, because it only holds the UK tariff, couldn't charge directly the EU's tariff on the goods movement. So we have published guidance now that explains how to override the tariff calculation in chief and make sure that the correct amount of duty is declared where goods imported into Northern Ireland from rest of world are at risk, and therefore the EU's tariff is payable. So that guidance has recently been updated, and it's now in it's part of the Northern Ireland guidance for declaring goods at risk on entry into Northern Ireland. So thank you very much, Des. I will pause there for any questions.
Thank you very much, Ellie. I mean, clear, concise, and very informative as usual. Thank you very, very much. The first question that's popped into the box is really an interesting one. If we can use chief in Northern Ireland, why can we not use chief for not at-risk goods going into Northern Ireland?
So I'm assuming that's referring to the use of chief for Great Britain to Northern Ireland movements where those goods aren't at risk. So we made chief available for rest of world imports and exports to Northern Ireland on a temporary basis, and this recognises that migration to CDS for those types of movements isn't as progressed as it would need to be to fully move over to CDS. Now, for Great Britain to Northern Ireland goods movements, we've made the TSS available, and the TSS is submitting declarations into CDS. I mean, CDS is the system that we will be using for all Northern Ireland movements as soon as that can be put in place. We need to do this because of its ability to hold the dual tariff. Whilst you could say, well, if they're not at risk, then we aren't charging a tariff, but actually kind of using the process to both identify whether goods are at risk or not at risk, and also giving businesses the ability to do things like declare part of a consignment at risk and part of a consignment not at risk. CDS is the system that has the capability to do that, and is the system we are going to be using in the longer term. So Chief really is, the use of Chief really is just a temporary measure whilst we get to the point where Chief can be fully rolled out across all Northern Ireland goods flows.
Thank you. Next question says, for B2C sales in Northern Ireland, the requirement for a establishment makes no sense, as what would anyone do there as the parcels go straight to the customer? If the parcel operator has an establishment in Northern Ireland, can this be used as the GB sender's establishment?
Under the current system, the vast majority of B2C parcels don't require a declaration. I think so. This is one of the areas I did mention is how the UK trader scheme can be used for parcel movements, given that you very often have the declaration submission by the parcel operator, but actually on behalf of the sender of the parcel, and how therefore the UK trader scheme fits into that. That is one of the areas where it is particularly complicated to fit this together. We are working closely with the parcel operator sector on this, because there isn't a really simple answer. If we're being quite honest about this, about how you make it work well to enable businesses to declare parcels not at risk. So we don't have the final position on that yet, but it is something that is a key part of the work that we're doing, is to look at both how the UK trader scheme works, how parcel movements work, and work out basically how we make this all fit together.
Thank you. Next one. I wish there'd be some shorter questions. we are a GB supplier to a retailer in Northern Ireland under DDP terms at their insistence. We have no establishment or fixed place of business in Northern Ireland, but have provisional authorization under the UKTS, which was due to expire on the 21st of April, now extended till the 31st of October. The retailer controls the goods movements through their logistics processes and distribution centres. But why is there a requirement for either an establishment or FPB in Northern Ireland, where we supply non-UK origin products, if our UKTS authorization lapses after the 31st of October? We now face an import duty charge moving goods to Northern Ireland from GB, even where the goods are clearly destined only for Northern Ireland, because we can no longer declare the goods as not at risk without a UKTS authorization.
So, this is one of the areas that needs a lot of work during the continuation of the easement period. I mean, the position of suppliers particularly in the retail industry, where the supplier is on DDP terms and doesn't have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland, is a really common thing across the industry, and therefore it is a really big part of what we need to work through during the rest of the easement period, to look at the options. I think there's no simple answer to this, and there's no one size fits all answer to this as well. I mean, the requirement for either a business to be established in Northern Ireland or have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland was a key, one of the key parts of the scheme that the EU were very really was important part of establishing a trusted trader scheme from their position. So it's an area of the scheme that we cannot unilaterally change, although we have this easement period in place for the time being to help support businesses adapt to the new requirements. So there is no simple answer, and there's going to need to be a lot of work in the next few months to understand the options and work through them. We are also looking at how other types of provisions might be of assistance in this area. So obviously there is the trade agreement if goods meet UK origin requirements. We're also looking at things like the option to use return goods relief, where goods have EU origin, come into Great Britain and then go to Northern Ireland. We will have a reimbursement scheme in place in due course that will mean that even if a tariff is charged up front, if a business can demonstrate it was consumed in Northern Ireland, they will be able to claim back a tariff. So there's other options, as well as a business also considering its structuring. And those are the things that we need to work through in the next few months.
I think you've almost answered this, but the next question is a major concern for UK businesses is that the UK trader scheme is the requirement, is the requirement for permanent establishment in Northern Ireland. Is there any update or indication that this requirement or easement will be permanently waived? I mean, there must be discussions going on like that at the moment.
So, as I said, at the moment we have a temporary easement in place. That is part of a range of temporary easements that was extended recently. The current position, and obviously, this is just how we understand it now, is we are working towards the end of the easement period. A business will have to either be established in Northern Ireland or have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland in order to continue to be authorised under the UKTS. That is what we're working towards at the moment.
Okay, I'd like the next question. I think the better question is, why do we need declarations at all for non-risk goods going GB to NI?
I mean, there's quite a lot in that question, Des. So I think there's a couple of things just kind of quite high level that that we can look at in this area. I mean, it's a good question. It's like, if you're not charging a tariff, why are you making a declaration? But actually, customs declarations are about a lot more than just charging a tariff. They are about maintaining the security and regulatory integrity of the area in which you're moving goods into. So customs declarations also link to a lot of requirements around licenses, about regulatory compliance, and having the customs declaration triggers is the sort of the start point of all of those other things as well. So without a customs declaration to start that and to kind of lead into those other things, you don't have the information about the goods that are coming in, the person who's moving them, the other kind of elements of a customs declaration in order to do that whole piece, which is not just about, is there a tariff to charge on this, which is about what is coming in and do we need to do anything else in respect of these goods that are coming into this area. So it's much bigger than that, than just about charging a tariff. Although I will say also, one of the key things about being able to not charge a tariff is you need to be able to have a compliance regime that sits around that. And that means you need to know everything that comes in so that you can also carry out compliance to make sure that those goods that come in and are declared not at risk are genuinely not at risk and are working within the framework that has been set out. So there's a lot more to it than just the charging of tariffs. And I know a lot of people would be really pleased if we could say, well, if goods are not at risk, you just don't need to do anything. It's, unfortunately, there is quite a lot more that sits behind it than just that.
Thank you. I think the next one sort of leads into this, and I think they're referring specifically to goods that are destined for Northern Ireland. But can some sort of facilitation be sought on SPS requirements for composite goods going into Northern Ireland? I mean, if you think a frozen pizza with lots of toppings on it, I mean, how many sort of health certificates are you going to have to be able to move that across the border so it can be eaten in a British territory? I mean, we've got to do something there.
And I wish I could comment upon health certificates. Unfortunately, health certificates are part of DEFRA's responsibility in government, so they're not something that I know very much about the policy or the requirements for. So I would have to ask that question be directed to DEFRA rather than to HMRC.
We will do that. Thank you, Eddie. Next question is, any thoughts on when CDS will be able to accept more than 99 lines on one declaration? I think one of the big problems a lot of people are having are these multi-line declarations, for, especially the
Des, I've lost sound from you just for a minute there.
The question was CDS 99
lines
declarations. As I'm saying, a lot of this I'm getting from a lot of the sort of supermarkets that have branches throughout Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and they've got these multi-line declarations. And with TSS, we are really, really struggling. And if we're going to sort of win half the battle by TSS offering a solution, are they then going to be restricted by CDS?
So it's right. CDS is restricted to 99 lines at the moment. I don't have a timescale on when that might be able to be changed. I'll find out and come back if we have anything more firm that we can tell you. That we can tell you about that. I mean, we are trying to look at whether there are existing flexibilities within the declaration rules that mean that we can further assist in terms of some aggregation in what needs to go into CDS particularly for high volume goods such as supermarket goods. So we are looking at what flexibilities could be used to further support these high volume declarations in the meantime, while CDS is restricted and going forwards, because it is, the point you make is well made, and one that we really recognise, that where you do have a truck full of supermarkets, it is particularly challenging in terms of the declaration process.
This one's also an interesting one I haven't seen before. We are a Northern Ireland business that can send declarations directly to CDS. We are being stopped by CDS from making GBNI supplementary declarations where the simplified frontier declaration has been done by TSS. Yet we are able to make the supplementary declaration for rest of world Northern Ireland shipments. We were previously advised that TSS is a CFSP process, yet CFSP process is not being followed. Why?
And I might ask Shankar just to come in just to kind of comment upon this as well. So TSS is using a CFSP process. It is using its own CFSP authorization to make both frontier declarations and supplementary declarations on behalf of businesses. The reason you might not recognize it as being like the process you use for rest of world imports is the frontier declaration part of the process is triggered usually by the sender of the goods or by the person moving the goods. And then TSS reaches out to the person who is the declarant, which is generally but not always the recipient of the goods, for the information for the supplementary declaration. So it is following the standard process. You just might not see it in quite the same way because different people are interacting with different parts of the system. Because it is using the TSS's CFSP authorization, therefore both parts of the declaration do sit together under that same authorization, and hence the whole process needs to go through as one. But Shankar, I wonder if there's anything else that you wanted just to add in on that in terms of how TSS manages that CFSP process.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. I think we've had some questions from people who would like to break up the sort of TSS process so they can do a bit of it themselves directly into CDS. And the problem is that for our process, as Ellie said, sort of is a sort of unitary process. It's very difficult for us to, impossible actually, for us to break that up in terms of the tech build, because the TSS system is designed as a sort of digital first system to really do what could be as many as 10 million declarations a year, which is so we're not able to be a sort of bespoke system where we say to somebody, yeah, you can do this bit of it and somebody else can do another bit of it. As Ellie said, the reason why you might be seeing this is because the haulier, our system starts with the entry summary declaration, which is the haulier's responsibility. So a lot of hauliers are doing that declaration, and when they put the information into the portal, that is generating the SFD on behalf of the importer. But depending on your relationship between the importer and the haulier, you might not see that. The first thing you might see is the email that we would then send to you, the importer, if you're on anything other than DDP terms, and asking you for extra information. But we do have some new optionality in the TSS to make it easier for people to reconcile the SFDs with their supplementary declaration that I'll talk about later on. But that may be the reason why you're sort of seeing what's sort of implicit in the question.
Thank you, Shankar. Back to some more Eddie questions. How do you define a fixed place of business? We are a distributor who deliver duty pay to Northern Ireland wholesalers. I suppose that is a UK trader scheme question. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So under the current easement, you can identify the fixed place business of your customer in order to support the application to the UK trader scheme, and that customer would need to otherwise either be authorised under the trader scheme or otherwise meet the requirements for the trader scheme. So a fixed place of business isn't set out in precise detail because it encompasses quite a number of things. I think we are looking to kind of share more guidance that will help businesses identify what can be a fixed place of business. So I think we're looking for something, it's something more than just a PO box or the address of, say, your accountant or other kind of, or your solicitor or advisory firm or something like that. It is kind of an actual bricks and mortar establishment, not establishment in the sense of a established business being established, but an actual place of business where the activities of the business being authorised are carried out, and where it has staff and operations. So there could be quite a number of things that come within that. One of the requirements under the UK Trader Scheme is that is also a location from where business records could be made available to support a not at risk declaration. So I think implicit in that is, again, that it needs to be a place from which the business operates and a place where its staff are present and carrying activities. But within that, there could be quite a number of things within that. And I think if a business is looking for specific kind of more specific advice, it'd be best to kind of have a conversation with us going forwards about that.
Here's Dan. There's a guidance on permanent establishments which touches on fixed places of business, which I'll put the link into the answer for this, if that's okay with you.
That would be great, Dan. Is that just a single answer for Northern Ireland? Because I think of, sort of permanent establishment from an OECD perspective, from a customs perspective on direct and indirect representation, and now for Northern Ireland. I mean, it would be great to sort of have a comparison and the differences right the way through. I'll
share what I've got, so you can see that.
I appreciate that. Eddie, we are running out of time, so I'd like to just combine the last two questions that we're going to put through to you, and then I'm sure Kevin will hassle you with a whole lot more there afterwards. But the last two is, are there any plans for TSS to offer a full declaration service, thus avoiding the need for supplementary declarations, which is causing great difficulty for many users? And then also, if we could go with that, when will TSS be available to process excise goods supplementary declarations? If we could, those two together.
I might direct those two questions to Shankar, if I might, because they're about changes and enhancements to the TSS service, which, I mean, there are changes and enhancements to the TS service kind of in planning, but I'll defer to Shankar to talk about kind of what's coming up and when those things might be made available.
Great.
Look at the timing. That makes that sort of absolutely perfect.
Segue into his slot.
Yeah, exactly. So Eddie, thank you very, very much. I hope you're going to sort of stick around and listen to the rest of our really sort of interesting session today. But maybe this is the right point to sort of hand over to Shankar and to the guys from TSS. So Shankar, if you could just consider, the answers to those questions in your presentation would be much appreciated.
I will, Des. Yeah, thanks very much. Shonali's going to start us off with some introduction to what the stats are and the latest information from TSS. But before we do that, let me just pick up the last question. I mean, in terms of the full frontier declaration, that is scheduled for middle of the year. We have a number of releases going out, and we're not that's not a priority for TSS right now, because we're very focused on getting a supplementary declaration process that works. And is more user-friendly for traders. But I will say one thing, though, which is that this doesn't solve your problem. I mean, if the concern is, and I know it is because I'm hearing this from traders, that of the complexity of the supplementary declaration and the number of data fields that are required, the TSS has deliberately used our CFSP authorization to break this into two, so that you can get over the frontier with the most simplified information, and then you don't have a time issue on the supplementary declaration, at least with respect to the frontier. If you were doing a full frontier declaration, you would have all of those fields, and they would be time critical in terms of getting over the frontier. So I have heard this from traders, you know, why can't we just do a full frontier declaration? Well, you could, but if you're having trouble with the subdeck, you're going to have trouble with the full frontier declaration. And instead of it not affecting you getting over the frontier, it will stop your truck at the frontier. So I don't think this is a solution to traders, but there are certain traders, particularly in the sort of excise area and others, that you know, where the benefits of the simplification are not that great because of all the information you'd have to put on the SFD. So anyway, so you know, we are conscious that there are a number of those traders who do want the full frontier, which is why we are offering it. But obviously, you know, we have to prioritize the releases that we're doing, and because for all the reasons I just said, that one will come in probably towards the middle of the year. So with that, I'm going to ask Shen to kick us off, and then I'll come back in when we start talking about transit in the new releases and the new stuff.
If you could go to the next slide, please, Kevin. So hi everyone. So as Shanka said, we're kind of just going to go through sort of everything that's been happening on the Trader Support Service. We went live on the 21st of December, and there's just been a number of releases and enhancements to the service in the months following. So we'll just go through some of the stats, kind of give you a feel for what's how the metrics are going and the amount of consignments we've now moved. We'll recap how the process works currently, and then we'll hand over to Shanka, who will go through the transit service and the service that we've stood up and all the various interaction points, which will include a presentation on how to interact with the Irish PBN system, which is the Irish version of the GVMS system, which we've got Celine on from the Irish Revenue Commission, who will present. We have one of my colleagues, Peter, who will go through the consignment first model, which we stood up essentially to allow separation of the consignment and the vehicle details, so particularly useful for the groupage hauliers. We will then go through what's been happening on the simplified frontier declaration for controlled goods, with a particular focus on what that means for those moving SPS goods, so things like dairy, meat, food products, etc., and sort of the extra steps you need to do in terms of traces and sheds and so on. We will then also cover everything that's been going on with supplementary declarations, which I appreciate is probably the main point of focus for a lot of traders at the minute. And Shanka will sort of go through the detailed options of how you can calculate what the correct tariff for you is, and potentially how you can waive the duty with using the UK Trader Scheme or claiming a waiver. And then lastly, we'll also cover just a few of the service enhancements that went live over the weekend just gone. And then obviously we'll have the Q&A at the end. So quite a full list of things. Kevin, could you go to the next slide? Thanks. So just a reminder of what TSS does and doesn't do. So it is a free to use service. It was set up by the government last year, as I said. We went live on the 21st of December, sort of fully ready for when all of the requirements kicked in on the 1st of January. It is worth noting that TSS is contracted on a temporary basis, so its future will be reviewed in a couple of years, and as I'll allude to in a second, you know, there are reasons for that. So as I said, TSS, the whole point of TSS was to kind of enable trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in line with the Northern Ireland Protocol, which came into effect on the 1st of January. So one of TSS's core focuses is to ensure that traders and hauliers and everyone involved in the movement of goods really feels sort of supported and educated with all of the new requirements and processes. So by doing this, we've tried to push a huge wealth of material on our NICTA site. That's the NI Customs and Trade Academy. And we can post, there's lots of links in this deck that you will hopefully get sent afterwards. And I'm sure Dan and Magda, when they're answering some of their questions, can direct you to it. But yeah, there's a wealth of material. There's something like over 30 different user guides, step-by-step details with screenshots of how do you fill in different types of declarations. There are videos demoing the process. We've held a huge number of webinars which delve into each of the topics covered in this seminar in much more detail, all available publicly. There's also a huge amount of like checklist and sort of slightly like shorter documents that can provide you slightly more visual versions of, you know, if I'm moving this type of good, what does it mean for me? What do I actually need to pay attention to? And so on. So we really do urge you to visit NICTA and kind of get comfortable with all of the education and the guidance that's out there. And obviously that, the entire point of educating and getting everyone ready for this is that we're here to provide a digital first service. So what does that actually mean? Obviously, we're trying to move as far away as we can from the sort of typical paper processes that's been involved in customs. So everything we do is automated. Hopefully many of you will have interacted with the portal where you upload your information live. You can add attachments and so on. And then once all the data is submitted correctly, TSS processes it almost instantaneously. We're integrating with CDS, ICS, and all of the various government systems in an automated manner, running 24/7 with no outages, etc. So, we're really trying to make sure it is that digital step forward. And it's just worth noting that we do only support goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland because we are contracted with HMRC. So it's that view of helping that particular angle of the trade. So, not looking at rest of world or goods that are coming from mainland EU or goods moving from GB into Ireland directly. So just worth noting what we're doing there. And then to wrap all of the service, we have a huge contact centre that we've stood up. There's about 750 agents, all available to help you with both inbound queries and sort of ones that come via the web. We have our tier ones who act basically sort of like as almost like call centre staff, handling all of your inbound calls. We then have our tier twos who have a few years customs experience, who are really ready to help you manage all of the cases and escalate them to their various levels or point you to the right guidance. We then have our tier 3 agents who have as a minimum 7 years of customs experience, but more often than not 20 years, 30 years in the industry, have come from customs background and are really there to have a really hands-on approach with the most complex queries. So they'll call you back, they'll call traders back, and they'll really walk through the process. And we've had a number of our agents sort of on the phone, really help and guide people through that sort of the first subdecks that were submitted. So we really do urge, if there are any issues with the TSS, or if there's any sort of queries you have on the guidance that's existing, please do reach out to the contact centre. That's the entire point of it. We really want to make sure that everyone does feel supported as we kind of navigate all of the new requirements. So that was kind of what TSS does do. It's worth noting that TSS does not provide a personalised advisory service. We're not here to take away from what customs agents are there to do. And sort of, the perfect example here is, if you're talking about a small trader who's never interacted with customs, never had to touch any of the current requirements and wants to move their small cheese or wine or something, we're there to provide that full end-to-end wrap and educate them on what's needed and when and what they need to do to ensure they clear the ports and fulfill their compliance, as opposed to sort of, advising a more experienced trader on what's the most economically advantageous routes to them. Should they open a customs warehouse? What sort of types of tariff options should they do? Should they use duty suspension and so on? There is an entire market out there of customs agents who are ready to help with those more bespoke solutions and really take a much more personalised approach to traders. We're here to support the majority of traders, making sure that goods do flow from Great Britain to Northern Ireland from day one. And we've managed to do that. But so we do urge, if you are looking for a more personalised service, that please do reach out to a customs agent. And part of this is tied into, as I said, TSS is a temporary service, so we don't want to take sort of annihilate the customs market that is there, because in the future, when TSS potentially exits the market, we want to ensure that there is a legacy and there is a huge number of customs agents ready to deal with all the new movements. And just a final thing to note, we also don't raise the non-standard documentations. So as you'll see later in the presentation, for example, when we're talking about controlled goods or food products and so on, there are extra requirements that need to be fulfilled under DEFRA DIRA, and TSS won't be able to support you in those. But again, we do have huge amounts of guidance around this and can point you to the relevant websites and government departments to ensure you're able to fulfill those requirements. Next slide, please. So just a few sort of happy stats here to kind of give you a view of what's actually been happening behind the scenes. We've now submitted over 330,000 ENS declarations. So just kind of giving you a feel for how much of that has moved. Obviously, it's not quite as high as we probably would have expected due to a number of factors, COVID probably being the most likely one, but we are seeing sort of like a steady increase in goods moving. So that's quite positive to see kind of trade volumes increasing. We've similarly completed over 270,000 SFDs linked to those ENSs above. And then now, since our subdeck functionality went live a few weeks ago, we've now submitted over 130,000 of those, and you can kind of see the steady increase across the weeks there. staying quite reasonably high, sort of like 30,000 each week. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have a huge amount of training materials on our NICTA website. I think as of this week, we just hit 330,000 downloads, which you can imagine is a huge amount of sort of accessibilities, you know, comparable to universities and so on. So, you know, we're really glad to see that the material that we're putting out there is being used, and we do urge people to visit the NICTA site. And then just sort of a bit wider on the TSS service metrics. As I stated, we've had 330 consignments been moved, and that's all been done in the last 3 months. We are a digital first service, and 90% of our inquiries were raised online, either via the web portal and then followed up by an outbound call. And last time I think I checked, there were about 28,000 outbound calls that had happened. So you can see kind of a huge amount of engagement happening across the TSS spectrum there. Again, huge amounts of downloads, over 190,000 visits to our NICTA site. So it's really great to see people engaging with the material there. And it's worth noting that we are constantly updating that site. We've started adding all the CDS error codes, which is updated in real time as we're learning more about that. So, you know, we really do try to maintain it with the most up-to-date information. As we can see, you know, subdecks continue to be the core focus, and we're ensuring that there's a huge amount of outbound calling to ensure that traders are ready and are able to submit their subdecks in a compliant way. And as we'll come across later, we are hoping our payments functionality, which is scheduled to go live this weekend, will kick off, and then we'll sort of have all the sort of the standard functionality ready, and you'll get to see sort of some of the how that works a bit later on in the presentation. And it's finally worth noting that we originally estimated to have sort of aimed to have about 24,000 traders registered. We now have 36,000 registered traders across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So it's really great to see the huge levels of engagement, and about 6,000 of those have registered since January the 1st. So just goes to show, you know, there is a huge amount of involvement there with the TSS from the market. Perfect, thanks, Kevin. And just a final note, you can sort of see the sort of the waves of the ENSs, you know, kind of generally peaking in the week and then dropping across the weekend. Daily peaks of around 1,800 movements, which is quite a great number. And yeah, total and arrived around 100,000. Thanks, Kevin. So just before we hand over, let's just recap what the process looks like today. Next slide, please. So as Shankar and Ellie alluded to earlier, TSS made a decision early on to essentially split the import process into a simplified frontier declaration, which would occur before the journey begins, and then a supplementary declaration, which would occur after the goods have been delivered, just to ensure that, you know, we prioritized flow, make sure all goods moving GBT&I were able to get across the frontier, and then ask traders to kind of fill in all the much more kind of like standard customs documentation around the commodity codes and sort of like more of the goods detail later on. So sort of the first step is ensuring, do you actually know what Incoterms you're moving under? So these are things like, are you moving things delivered duty paid? Are you moving them under DAP, XWEX, etc.? Just sort of understanding what your business terms are so that you can understand who is it that's interacting with the TSS process. Because it's the way it works within the TSS process is that it's the carrier who will fulfill the first part of the TSS process, which is the ENS, so the entry summary declaration, also known as the safety and security declaration. So this is an EU requirement within the security zone, so that border force have an idea of what is moving in and out. So this is the obligation of your carrier or your haulier, and they will require the goods information and the details of the buyer or the supplier, depending on the Incoterms. So for example, under sort of like standard terms, you would expect it would be the buyer in Northern Ireland who would be required to fulfill this information, as they are the importer. But if you were moving things under DDP, so delivered duty paid, it would be the responsibility of the GB supplier. So it's just worth kind of paying attention to that and making sure that your haulier is aware of who is it that they'll need to be getting the information from. So it's just sort of the standard information that goes into the ENS. So, you know, where the goods are going, where have they come from, the EORI numbers, and then sort of like basic goods description and so on, and the weight. Once they've loaded all of that into the system, we then generate, we interact with the import control system, which is ICS, and we pass back what's called the movement reference number, so the ENS MRN, which is passed back to the haulier. We then also use the data submitted in the ENS, and and we just duplicate it to create the simplified frontier declaration. So we've tried to minimize that by using the same data set and just generating it on behalf of the trader. And then we then submit that on to CDS, which is obviously the custom system that's live in Northern Ireland. And we produce the reference number from CDS there. And we pass both of those reference numbers back to the haulier and back to the trader. At that point, in order to actually take the journey, you will need to interact with the HMRC GVMS system. What you'll need there are those two MRNs we were just speaking about. One's the ENS, one is the SFD. Apologies for all the acronyms. So one's your customs, one's your security reference number. Both of those need to be inputted into the GVMS system, which then generates a goods movement reference, or a GMR. This is what you will need in order to board the ferry. And it's sort of proof that you've done all of the customs requirements in order to actually make the crossing into Northern Ireland. And the ferry operators will scan that GMR as part of the check-in you know, are able to turn sort of traders away if they're unable to make sort of prove that they have done that step. So at that point, if you scan your GMR, you've now begun your journey. All of the sort of getting across the frontier has now been done. You can continue your journey into Northern Ireland, carry on with the delivery. And then at that point, once we know that the GMR has been scanned, it triggers the process within TSS to say these goods have moved now. We send an email out to the trader or whoever's EORI number was used in the declaration to say, we know your goods have now been delivered. You have until the 5th working day of the following month to now please submit your supplementary declaration on the portal. And at that point, you log in. You'll be asked for all of the sort of the additional information, which you'll see later on in the presentation. And at that point, you can understand whether any duty is payable and make a payment from this weekend. And at that point, your import is completed. So those are the main steps there. So next slide, please. And I will hand over to Shankar.
Great, thanks, Sonali. So I'm going to talk about transit first. We've got quite a lot of material to get through, so please keep your questions coming. Dan and Magda are answering them in real time, and we think this is just a much more efficient way of proceeding. So given how much information we've got to share with you. So the transit process, a couple of things to say here. First of all, if you are moving goods GB to NI, there are only two ways of doing this now, as of the 1st of January 2021. One is to use transit, and TSS has a transit service for goods movements GB NI via Irish ports, or a direct export to Ireland. And a direct export to Ireland is like any other direct export to a European member state. And then you would use free circulation under the Northern Ireland Protocol to get your products anywhere onto the island of Ireland, but it is just like an export to an EU member state, with all of the process that comes with that. And for that reason, we would very much want you to use the TSS transit service. We are constantly improving it and making it more user friendly. But if you don't want to use it, if you want to do the export to Ireland, you're going to need a customs agent, because TSS doesn't support the direct export. If we go to the next slide, please. So why would you use the TSS transit service? Sorry, can we go? Sorry, Kevin, can we go back? Yeah. Why would you use the TSS transit service? Well, as I mentioned, it minimizes the amount of paperwork that you would do. If you had to do a direct export, it reduces the number of not only Irish customs processes, but also UK exports and GB exports and so on processes that you would ordinarily need to interact with. And certainly one of the leading authorities on transit and former head of the Dutch Customs Brokers Association thinks that it is as simplified a process as we're able to provide. If we go to the next slide, please. So I'll summarize the process for you. You use the TSS portal to submit an ENS declaration. That's the normal system. You'd select GBNI via Ireland, that route option, and then TSS will send you the transit template for you to complete and return. we will send you the entry summary declaration MRN and the transit local reference number, MRN being the movement reference number. You will seal your trucks before transport, and then you would arrive typically at the office of departure to start the transit and collect the transit accompanying document and the transit MRN. Now, this part of the process is slightly different now because we've introduced very recently, further optionality into it. We would, what you've been used to in the past is we would notify border force at this point, we start the transit, and you'd start the transit typically at the office of departure at Road King, if you're going to Holyhead, for example, which is the office of departure in the Holyhead area. We now have authorized consignor locations, which are which you're able to use in GB. So there is an authorized consignor location in the Holyhead area, which you can use, which we think will provide an easier service. You would then, and this hasn't changed, you would then have to submit the PBN, which is the pre-boarding notification, to the Irish, the equivalent of GVMS, as Shonali mentioned. I'm going to ask in a second, as soon as I've done this slide, I'm going to ask Celine O'Neill from the Irish Revenue Commission to literally just walk you through the PBN process, just to show how easy that is. You then complete the ferry crossing into Ireland, and that fulfills the Office of Transit requirement at the Irish port. Clear the Irish port and continue to Northern Ireland destination. On arrival at the Northern Ireland destination, now again, this is slightly changed from the previous process that you might have been familiar with. As Ellie mentioned, that remote closing, which we've been using, where Border Force would essentially allow you to close your transit at the point of unloading, provided you've not heard from them in this 6-hour window from the start of the first notification to Border Force to the notification TSS does on your behalf after 6 hours. If you've not heard from them, you can go ahead and unload. That remote closing process was a temporary process, and that will go on April the 5th. But what we have is far more authorized consignee locations, and those should go live very, very shortly. Those include authorized consignee locations on the western part of Northern Ireland, so that if you're going to, let's say, Derry, Londonderry, or places, points west, we will have authorized consignee locations there, and we will have authorized consignee locations in the eastern part of Northern Ireland as well. So you can use those authorized consignee locations to close your transit, or you can go to the office of destination, and certainly the Warren Point office of destination is not much of a detour for most of those eastern movements, and you're sort of on the way to the Belfast area. So you may decide that actually the office of destination closing is actually just as easy. So those new functionalities are sort of in the process of being put together, and we will be communicating to our tradie community about those very shortly. And you close the transit process through the authorized consignee location or the office of destination closing, at which point the alternative customs process, which is the simplified frontier declaration and the supplementary declaration, kick in, and that would be basically the SUPDEC and the SFD from GB to NI. So what you've done at the very beginning of this process is use the portal to submit an ENS declaration. That holds the SFD information, which is then released at the point that the transit is closed. And if we go to the next slide before I bring Celine in. So actually, let's go to Celine now, and she's going to present on the Irish PBN notification and just walk you through that process.
Thanks, Shankar, and thanks everyone for inviting me to be here this morning. I have a few slides. It won't take long. It's a fairly simple, straightforward process. If we can move on to the next slide, I just explain what is the PBN. So it acts very similar to the GVMS system, and in essence, it's a virtual envelope that allows us to gather all of the declaration details for one vehicle together under one unique identifier. So it's not a declaration system. We have the automated import system for imports into Ireland, or you'll have the NCTS system if you're moving under a transit declaration. And those declarations are still made to those systems. But what the PBN does is it gathers all of the MRNs, the movement reference numbers from those declarations, and gathers them together with the vehicle that's actually moving the goods. And it's required for all inbound and outbound journeys that are moving by Ro-Ro ferry. So if we can move on to the next slide. There's some benefits as well to you from using this. So it allows us to reuse some of the data that would be required to arrive the goods if they're being imported into Ireland. And it also allows us to do the Office of Transit formalities digitally. So if you're moving your goods under transit from GB through Ireland into Northern Ireland, you won't need to present those goods to us at the port to present the TAD. You'll just be able to keep moving, hopefully. And what it does as well is, because vehicles often contain more than one consignment and each declaration obviously would be separately risk analysed, it allows us to give one channel, so one instruction per vehicle rather than per the individual declaration. That's no use obviously to a haulier where they're not normally the declarant, and that information would normally only be provided to the declarant. So this allows the driver to know what it is they need to do when they arrive in an Irish port. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll just quickly talk you through how you create a PBN. So this service is available on the Revenue website. It's revenue.ie/Ro-Ro. And it allows, you don't need a government account or anything like that. It's available to anyone in the supply chain to create the PBN. And there's a number of options, but you'll be just selecting the Create PBN option that you can see there, and it will open the following screen. So the process will be the same whether you're coming into Ireland or leaving Ireland. You'll always start on that same screen, and then the movement direction. This seems to be causing some confusion for people. So if you try to think of it about what way is the ferry moving. So for goods arriving in Ireland from the UK, then that is a movement into Ireland. If you think about it, the ferry is arriving in Ireland. So you'd select the movement direction as into Ireland. And then you'd need to put in the MRNs that have been provided to you by TSS. So you need at least two, one for an ENS for your safety and security declaration, and one for either the transit declaration if you're moving under transit, or the import declaration if you're moving under, if you're importing directly into Ireland. Once you've added those numbers into the text field there and clicked on the add button, you can see in this example then that it will show you the MRN and the type of import declaration underneath. And you can always remove those declarations if the details change, or if you can add more at any time. But there's always only will be one PBN for a vehicle. Sorry, did we move? Sorry, Kevin, if you can move on. Yeah, sorry, I was talking to this screen, but it wasn't up. So hopefully you'll see it there. And once you've added in all of the MRNs, so as I said, there's usually a scenario where a vehicle is carrying more than one consignment. So there's usually going to be multiple MRNs in there. Once you've added all of the MRNs, you click on the button down the bottom that says Create PBN. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll know that it has been done successfully. You'll get a message back to say that you've successfully created your PBN. And the important thing to notice there is the PBN status. So once you have a good to proceed to check-in status, you can then head to the ferry port of departure. If your PBN does not have that good to proceed to check-in status and you arrive at the ferry terminal, you will be refused boarding by the ferry operator. So it's really important that the the PBN is created before you travel to the port of departure, and that you have this good to proceed check-in status. If we move on to the next slide, the system also has a channel lookup functionality. So I mentioned earlier that the driver or whoever in the supply chain will have access to the channel information for the vehicle. So just to say that if any of the declarations that are for goods that are on that vehicle, if any of the goods require a control, a documentary or a physical control, then the channel for that entire vehicle will correspond with that risk. So hopefully with a transit, everything will be good to go and we won't have any interest in the load. And then on the next screen, you'll see that you will get your exit the port message. But it's important that you do check that information. We have seen, and it's particularly around that movement direction, that we have seen some of the transit declarations have been red routed because of problems with PBN, and there was a problem recently with the NCTS system itself. So the driver does need to check that information, the channel information. We have increased our functionality since these slides were produced, and there is an ability when you're creating the PBN to include 2 mobile phone numbers and an email address, and then the channel information will be automatically sent to those numbers and that email address about 30 minutes before the vehicle or the ferry arrives in Ireland. Just a reminder that it does need to be done as well for if you're moving goods from Northern Ireland through Ireland to go to the UK. And the only difference in that circumstance is that you'll be selecting the movement type out of Ireland. The last slide is just some terminology, some abbreviations, and then the very final slide just has some contact details for Irish Revenue. So if you need to contact us, if we can move on to the next slide, sorry, Kevin. There's the different email addresses, and there's a 24-hour helpline there as well. If anyone has any difficulties, they should feel free to contact us. Obviously, all of this information is already available on the Revenue website. So that's it for me. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks.
I may jump in. I'm not sure how long you are going to stay with us, but while you've got here, could I ask a question? I mean, this is a question that has been asked on a number of occasions, and I don't know if you could maybe help us with an answer. The question is how long orange routed or controlled goods, wine and alcohol in full loads should be taken to clear through Irish customs in Dublin. This is a question I've had from quite a few of my members, that there seem to be sort of significant delays, especially when goods are routed orange or red by the AIS system. I mean, we're talking about delays of sort of from 7 days up to 3 weeks. Is this normal? Is there something we should be doing? Are we being sort of led up the garden path by the brokers that are representing us in Dublin? If you could just give us sort of an idea of what we could expect, would be much appreciated.
Sure, no problem. So an orange check normally means that support and documentation is required. Because this process is so new to a lot of people, it's not immediately clear what support and documentation is required. So the notice that will come out from the AIS system will simply tell them that the goods have been orange routed and that support and documents are required. What we're seeing is that sometimes it's actually support and documentation may be for one of the other state agencies who conduct the SPS controls. So there is definitely an information gap happening there, where the correct support and documentation isn't being provided to the correct agency. So we're currently working with the other agencies to try and increase the information sharing between us all, so that so long as one agency has the information, it won't need to be repeatedly submitted to each agency. So that should hopefully speed it up. I suppose it depends on what's causing the problem, what's causing the orange routing. So say, for example, if a trader has insufficient funds in their account, if there is a customs charge and there isn't enough money in the account to pay that liability, that will depend on how quickly the trader can top up their account and have funds available. What we also saw in the early days were a number of cases where the customs declaration wasn't correctly included in the PBN. So without trying to get too technical on it, I mentioned that we will reuse the data in the PBN to complete some of the formalities. So one of the formalities is using AIS is to provide a presentation notification, which tells customs that the goods have arrived. So where the PBN has been used correctly, we will generate that presentation notification, and the trader won't have to do it themselves. But what we're seeing in some instances is where the goods, where the MRN hasn't been properly included in the PBN, and then it gets kind of stuck in this registered state and it doesn't move on. So it really depends on what has caused the goods to be orange or red routed. We're certainly aware that there was a lot of systems performance issues, which added to the delays that were being experienced. And I'd like to just apologise for that, take the opportunity to apologise for any delays that has caused. We're quite confident now that the system is more stable. So those kind of underlying issues shouldn't be happening anymore. And then there is obviously backlogs associated with that, where we're trying to work through when something has gone wrong, trying to identify what the issue is and work through it. So certainly our expectation when we were preparing for Brexit was that if the PBN was used, we would know immediately when the ferry departs the UK which consignments were on their way to us, and with the view of doing the majority of the risk analysis and the documentary text before the goods ever arrive. So I suppose it's probably worth noting that approximately 80% of all of the arrivals are being green routed and don't need any further interaction with state agencies when they arrive. But the difficulty then is when things do go wrong in getting the information out to the correct person of what is required to be provided back to us, and making sure it comes into the right agency, and that those things can then be quickly cleared up. But it really, a couple of hours would have been our expectation for a physical exam or for a documentary check. So any delays longer than that are regrettable, and we are working with the trade to help them increase their awareness of what is required. But we're also working with the other agencies to try and improve the information sharing. So I hope that addresses the question.
It does. Thank you very, very much. And Shankar, sorry to interrupt you there, please.
That's all right. That's all right. That was an important question. So if we go to the next slide, Kevin. And we have very limited time, so I'm going to have to go through this quite quickly, given what we've got left. And by the way, all these slides are fully available to you. They'll be shared with you. So if we miss a slide, don't worry. You can always come back to us at any time if you have questions on any of this. Just a quick point about the SPS treatment if you're using transit. I mean, for SPS, this is the only area where it really is a sort of direct movement into Ireland, and you have to satisfy the Irish, i.e. the European SPS appropriate certificates, so the export health certificates, all of those things, but they are going into the Irish system. So Traces NT is going into the Irish system. Now you can, if you're a Northern Ireland importer, be registered on the Irish system. You don't have to be an Irish importer to be registered, but your Northern Ireland agent or your Northern Ireland importer does have to be registered on the Irish systems, and that CHED form has to be done 24 hours in advance. And it is worth pointing out that the easements that apply for GB to NI direct trade in the SPS area don't apply if you're using transit. So you do have to do all of these agricultural processes, and there could be a check at the border control post at the Irish port of entry. If we go to the next slide, please. So we are now supporting the Northern Ireland to GB route via Irish ports, and we're doing it as a indirect export, so a second second line there. You could, obviously we also support Northern Ireland to GB direct movements. That's the unfettered access piece of the Northern Ireland Protocol, obviously subject to the treaty, the 14 treaty areas and goods moving in duty suspension. The reason we do an indirect export as opposed to transit is under the Northern Ireland Protocol, you have to do an export declaration for goods in duty suspension, and transit goods are in duty suspension. So you'd have to do both the export declaration and the transit accompanying document, and the level of process therefore doesn't allow you to take advantage of what transit would ordinarily provide, and that's why we do the indirect export. That's why we don't support transit GB via NIGB via Ireland. We're very conscious that for a lot of people who are doing that want to use transit because they want to use the land bridge, they want to get their product into the EU. The TSS doesn't support those EU transits anyway, so we're very focused on NIGB, and so you'd have to use a customs agent if you are doing any of those processes. If we go to the next slide, please. So it is an indirect export. We will do the indirect export declaration, the export declaration into CDS. It will be with Northern Ireland as the place of export and Ireland as the place of exit. TSS will provide the export declaration movement references. The only thing that the trader or the haulier will have to do is to create the PBN on the Irish railway system, which is exactly the same as Celine just walked you through, except in the reverse sort of order. We strongly recommend that you use this route. This route, coupled with the border operating model in GB, and the delay in when you would have to do the full import declaration into GB, means that there's very little process, and the agricultural SPS check, the IPATH requirement, for example, doesn't kick in until October. So for right now, this is a very simple way of getting your products from Northern Ireland to GB using using an Irish port. If we go to the next slide. I'm going to ask Peter now to quickly take us through the consignment first model. Now, this is one of the many areas where we've listened to what your concerns were with the system, and we've tried to create a new functionality that enables particularly groupage hauliers to have an easier way of using our portal. So I'll hand over to Peter now.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Shankar. Yeah, the consignment first, we did listen to hauliers and their concerns around groupage, particularly when they're moving from depots to Northern Ireland, where at the moment of them creating the ENS, they had issues with their particular model. So on consignment first, we can, if you look on here, we've got the movement of the goods when the goods movement details are not ready known, the total size of the consignment to be shipped. TSS launched a new consignment first model. It allows for the consignment to be entered onto the portal based on individual data from headers, details. We can move on to the next slide because I know we're conscious of time. The first release that we had was the header details. So in the header details, what we had mostly was the journey details, so the registration details of the vehicle, who was moving it, with who the carrier was, and then underneath that there was the consignment header, which gave all the details of each individual movement. So each of the individual movements within that groupage trailer had a header, which then that was used to drill down into the items relating to that individual consignment header. Now we have the next, move on to the next slide. So this is the next model, which takes the trader consignments and joins, those can be created up front as drafts. So if you're collecting, say, for example, in the eastern part of the UK, and you're moving a trailer and it's moving at different points through the journey up towards Liverpool, say, then those particular consignments, you're collecting information at the time of as you're moving that truck. So during that time period, information can be sent to the final point of where you're going to be creating the consignment in total and loading the actual trailer. You can move those, you can collect that information up front, create that on the system, and then at the point, Liverpool, for example, you would actually create the actual header details for that trailer. One of the advantages of doing this is that you're able then to, for that trailer, you're able to say, for example, one of the consignments you had collected wasn't available for whatever reason, it'd been delayed, then you could actually add that one to the trailer or take it off. So within the system, it allows you to tag the actual shipment, each of the consignments, and untag it to the actual ENS we submit. Once you've submitted the ENS record and that declaration has been made, you can't then go back in and amend it without cancelling the ENS and then re-entering again. So that creates a lot more detail. It does allow for more flexibility for groupage hauliers when they've got struggling against time, getting the information. This allows them a lot more flexibility. So that's what I've got to say on consignment first. So I'll hand you back to Shankar.
Thanks, thanks, Peter. If we go to the next slide, please. There is a demonstration video that there are lots of these videos on the NICTA website, so please do make full use of them. Go to the next one. So I'm going to talk very quickly about the SFD for controlled goods, and when we say controlled, we mean SPS controlled or other government department controlled goods. That has been live and into CDS for over a week now. And we are not seeing too many problems here in terms of the concern was that you might have a truck held unable to go into the ferry terminal, but we do require this additional data, and we do require CHEDs to be properly submitted for these movements. And we've got information on the slide in terms of your user guides and the data requirements for doing this if you're moving these kinds of goods, i.e. pharmaceutical goods, food products, excise goods, any good that requires another government department's license or approval process. If we go to the next slide. And when you're doing this, the way it will work is that if you do need an export health certificate, in other words, you're not included in one of the easements, either the supermarket easement or the authorized trader easement, you will need the seller will need to provide the export health certificate. The buyer then needs to, or the buyer's agent needs to put that onto the Traces NT system and generate the CHED, which will be used in the import declaration. If we go to the next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is a flow diagram. We thought it would be useful for you to understand exactly how the process flow works for SPS goods and how you integrate into Traces and the ECHO system, for example, for the export health certificate. So what you need to focus on if you're a buyer or a supplier is the bottom two rows, and what you'll see is that there are obligations that you need to fulfill, but they aren't incredibly complex. If you're the supplier, the exporter, you need to arrange the health certificate or the phytosanitary certificate. Once you've got the EHC, that goes into ECHO, which is a government system. You would then load and seal the container. The customs declarations would be raised, and that would either be by the buyer or the supplier, depending on your Incoterms. You would include that CHED information. So at the same time that you do the export health certificate, if you're the supplier, the buyer, the Northern Ireland importer, would be completing CHED Part 1. There's a 24-hour notice period into Traces, and that will then go to the Port Health or Border Agency. From the supplier standpoint, that information would be entered by the importer into the TSS portal, if they are the one who has to do the import declaration. If you're on DDP terms and the exporter has to do the import declaration, they would be the ones entering that data into TSS. This would then raise the ENS and SFD. This goes into the systems, and you'll see it flow through the process so that you eventually get the consignee receiving the goods. If we go to the next slide, please. If we go to the next slide, Kevin. If you're moving SPS goods or essentially goods of animal origin, livestock, plants, plant products, the traces registration is the crucial thing, at least 24 hours in advance of arrival. There are notifications that you need to do. And you need to attach the export health certificate or the phytosanitary certificate. Again, that applies to you if you're not on one of the easements, if you're not on the supermarket scheme or the authorized trader scheme. If we go to the next slide. And this is just the process in terms of how what it actually looks like when you're looking at the portal, and what the numbers are that you need to put in, and the actual how to use the portal, the user guide, and the tariff guidance are listed there on the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy website. We go to the next slide, and there are lots of videos for this. And if we go to the next slide. Yeah, I wanted to get to this because this is obviously an important piece of this. So, and if we go to the next slide, just a quick recap. And I think one of the questions on the FFDs earlier on suggests that, and we are getting these questions from lots of people, that, why do we have to do all these things? The supplementary declaration is not a TSS requirement. It is a legal requirement. If you are not doing the supplementary declaration, you are not doing an import declaration, and you are not complying with the law. So what we've done in TSS is, because we recognized that we needed to prioritize flow at the frontier, we used our CFSP authorization to create a very simple process to get over the frontier, or at least as simple as legally possible to get over the frontier, which is the SFD. And I think, unfortunately, despite the fact we said this frequently on all of these presentations, that there will be a supplementary declaration. We will reach out to traders for the extra information that needs to go onto the supplementary declaration by the 5th business day of the month following the month of the movement. We did say we were going to do this. I think traders felt like that all they needed to do was the SFD. That is not correct, and it's not correct as a legal matter. It's not a TSS matter. So again, the way this will work is you submit the information, you submit the entry summary declaration information. This generates the SFD. You move the goods, but we will then come back to you with, as we are doing now, with requirements on the supplementary declaration. We go to the next slide. This is now live in the system, as you all know, because you're all receiving emails, lots of emails, and you're all complaining about how many emails you're receiving from us. We are doing this now. Now, what we're doing, we understand that the SDI is a very complex process with 23 data fields. And we understand that traders are having difficulty with this. So our tier 3s, as Shonali said at the beginning, are reaching out directly to traders who seem to be having difficulty with the supplementary declaration, and they are assisting those traders complete those SDIs. If we go to the next slide. So in terms of the timetables and the timelines, it's the GMR that is the trigger to begin the SDI process, and you use the EORI number listed in the ENS. So we'll come to you because of the EORI number that we have. will contact the trader to request this additional information. For movements after February the 15th, that's an ongoing process for doing your supplementary declarations. We're aware that there's a backlog from the beginning of January to February the 15th, and that backlog is going to be cleared in a specific way, where starting off with certain things that are easier to deal with, like people who are on the UK trader scheme. But the point is that we will come to you and we will ask you for the information that that you need to provide. We also the process for doing supplementary declarations for controlled SPS controlled goods and the bulk upload API options for supplementary declarations are going to be released very shortly. But subject to that, this is the timeline at the bottom of the slide, and it's actually 5th working day. So the next deadline, the next date we're working towards is, I think, April the 6th, because it's business days. If we go to the next slide, and there's a video on the supplementary declaration piece there. If we go to the next slide. So the key points on the supplementary declaration, the point I would like to stress here is that you need to have a plan with your supplementary declaration, because this is the point at which you are going to be declaring the tariff that you may or may not be paying for goods going into Northern Ireland. So you have a not at risk process and you have an at risk process. It again is very important that you've correctly put in the additional information codes, because the architecture of the system, if you put the wrong one in at the header stage, which is NIDOM or NIIMP, you'll go down the wrong route, basically. So NIDOM is what most people will be doing, because that's GB to NI moving in free circulation. NIIMP is what most people will be doing. Well, sorry, NIIMP is what people will be doing if they're moving under special procedures. But as I say, most people will be using NIDOM as that additional information code at the header stage. Once you get into the supplementary declaration piece, if you are on the UK trader scheme, you have to add in NIREM. A lot of traders just assume that because they were on the UK trader scheme, they didn't need to do anything else. That's not correct. The UK trader scheme says that you're a not at risk trader, but NIREM, that additional information code, tells the system that the goods also are not at risk, and you have to type that in order to benefit from the UK trader scheme. If you are seeking to benefit from the waiver, then you need to type in NIAID. The information that you need there from the tariff guide is listed there, as well as the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy guidance on control goods and on the online tariff tool. That's all listed there. So that's where you'd go in order to start the process of determining, what tariffs apply. If we go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? So the way you would do this, and we created a bit of it's not really a decision tree, it's more like a decision engine, but it's a decision process, or whatever you want to call it, of how you would determine whether you can qualify for the UK trader scheme or not, or whether your goods are not at risk, or not, or whether they're at risk. The first issue is the EU common external tariff zero? Because if the EU common external tariff is zero, then your goods are automatically not at risk. They default to not at risk, because there would never be a duty that you'd have to pay anyway. If they're not, and most cases obviously they won't be, do you have UKTS authorization? If your goods are subject to EU trade defence measures, then you can't use the UK trader scheme. The reason for that is because the EU and the UK agreed this, largely because trade defence measures mean very high tariffs and quotas and so forth, and the possibility of avoidance and smuggling was deemed by the EU to be too great to take advantage of the UK trader scheme. So subject to that, then you could be on the UK trader scheme, provided you meet those end-use criteria that Ellie mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, things like selling to consumer-facing facilities, and obviously there's an easement on the requirement for a Northern Ireland facility, which was part of the agreement, but that's been eased until October. So provided you're in those goods, if you're a commercial processor, then the question would be, do I meet the commercial processing exemptions, which are or exceptions, which are in the areas of food, health, healthcare, not-for-profit, construction, and if I do, then I can still be not at risk. But if I don't, then I'm going to be an at risk. Or am I a very small processor? Am I under £500,000 per revenue per year? What you also would want to ask yourself, and if you're a very small trader, you might want to ask this even before you go through this decision tree. This is why it's not really a decision tree, it's more of a decision process. You might want to ask, if I'm under, if I could claim the de minimis threshold for the de minimis waiver under the European state aids rules, which is €200,000 over 3 fiscal years, then maybe what I should be doing is typing in NI aid, claiming the subsidy. I have to register, and there's a link there on the right-hand side to how you would claim the waiver. Put NI aid onto my supplementary declaration and simply claim the waiver. And as a rough rule of thumb, if you assume a tariff for industrial goods of about 4%, that translates to about £1.5 million worth of imports from GB to NI. If I'm around that kind of level, I might want to really look at this because it would be a lot easier than having to go through the complex process. If my goods are at risk, then the only way to claim the zero preferential tariff of the trade agreement is to check the rules of origin to make sure my products satisfy the rules of origin of the trade agreement, and that is quite a complex exercise, as we'll see. So I might want to avoid doing that. And certainly, if you're a very, very small trader, you're trading, £1 million or less, GB to NI. I might say, actually, rather than forcing that trader to go through a complex rule of origin calculation, just claim the waiver. If we go to the next slide. So the previous slide was the at-risk, not at-risk decision tree for GBNI. This is rest of world, and it's very much the same, but the two tariffs that would apply would either be the UK global tariff or the European tariff when your goods are coming into Northern Ireland. And the critical questions there is the EU duty lower than or equal to the UK duty? If that's the case, they're going to be automatically defaulting to not at risk, and i.e. the UK duty would have to be paid. If that isn't the case, then if the EU duty is within 3% of the UK duty, then you go through this process of determining whether you qualify for the UK trader scheme so that your goods could be not at risk and so that you pay the UK duty. I should have mentioned a critical piece of the not at risk UK trader scheme qualification is sufficient control over your movements. And you need to really have control over your move. You need to know that these are going only into Northern Ireland, they're not going onward into Ireland. And the control also applies, as Ellie mentioned, to that apportionment rule. I mean, really have historic data on how much is not at risk, how much is at risk. But subject to all of that, if you can qualify, then your goods would be not at risk and you would pay the UK duty. If we go to the next slide. So there's 4 checks: is the EU common external tariff zero? Could you qualify for the UK trader scheme? If not, you're going to have to satisfy the preferential rules of origin in the FTA, in the EU-UK TCA. Now, bear in mind with these preferential rules of origin that there are a number of sectors where there are quite stringent local content rules, which might mean that your product doesn't qualify. While there is accumulation between the EU content and UK content, there are also onward processing rules, so that if you are simply bringing something into the UK, into GB, and you're not doing anything with it, and it's simply a distribution to Northern Ireland, that would be a secondary movement, and that might mean that you would have to pay a tariff. And so you would then check whether you could claim the duty waiver or the subsidy. If none of that applies, then the only way not to pay a duty would be to use special customs procedures, such as, and Ellie mentioned at the outset, things like return goods relief. There's a number of other, inward processing. There are maybe special customs procedures that you would actually want to use in this case. If we go to the next slide. We have more functionality, and I wanted I know we're short of time, but I wanted to at least dwell on this a little bit. We are conscious, and we have heard that this new functionality is there because you asked for it. So please keep telling us how you think the portal could be made more user-friendly, made more intuitive. We have built this engine at incredible pace. And so obviously we know that there are going to be improvements that we can make. So we're very conscious of that. We've given you this because you asked for it. So some of the functionality that came in over the weekend are linking the SFD and the SDI. We were conscious that people would find it quite difficult to link the SFD to the SDI. So we've done that with dates so that it's easier for you to locate the relevant SFD. So there's a new optional field, a trader's reference field, which is added to the ENS SFD, and that enables the SDI to be more easily generated. We have added additional information about the additional codes, allowed you to select multiple codes where possible. We found that the system was sort of defaulting to to various settings that weren't helpful to traders. So we've made the additional information code mandatory, so you can't sort of forget to put in the NIREM, for example, or the NIAID if that applies to you. You can recall a pending payment back to draft and amend if you're getting a payment requirement that you thought, well, why should I be making a payment here? That can be recalled to draft now. And we've optimized the performance. And payments is going to go live very shortly, and then you'll be able to sort of complete the whole process. Go to the next slide, please. That's the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy. Lots of information there. Please use it. I would point out the level of downloads is beyond at this point. I think what you'd expect from a massive online course or a university. So we have really set up a free customs university for Northern Ireland. If we go to I think that's probably the next. That's probably that's the slides. Just one final point. I mean, there are incidents with any live system. There are incidents from time to time. I think Celine mentioned some of the incidents that the Irish systems have had, and as you know, NCTS has been down as well from time to time. The TSS has never been down until this morning, where we had to pause the SUP deck for a short time. It will be back again this afternoon, and some of these incidents are being caused by us adding a lot of new functionality and new optionality. So this is one of the reasons why we can't simply do everything you want immediately. We can't do it immediately because every time we do something like that, there's a risk that we're going to cause an incident because of the way because it's a complex. It's a complex IT system. So there we are. But having said that, if you are experiencing difficulty with the supplementary declaration as of this morning, this afternoon it should all be back up again. But that is our first incident where we've had to pause the system in any way, and I'm sure HMRC colleagues and Irish Revenue colleagues will be very sympathetic to us about incidents that do occur from time to time. So with that said, I think all of the questions, I hope all of the questions have been answered by our brilliant team. But if there's anything else that hasn't been answered or anything else you want to raise, happy to do that now.
Yeah, please, Shane, because there are a couple of channels questions that come through the other channels. Maybe if I could just sort of throw a couple of them at you quickly. First one is we have a number of instances where the GB sender is being asked to complete the supplementary declaration, but they are not delivering on a delivered duty pay terms. It is understood the wrong EORIs are being declared by carriers. So how can this be amended so the correct importer is making the supplementary declaration?
Right. So we are conscious that on the system at the moment, people can enter EORI numbers of, and I think most of the time this is not a nefarious activity. Most of the time, this is somebody putting the EORI number of their customer down or something of that nature. Unfortunately, we have no way of going to people for the supplementary declaration other than the EORI number. But we are looking at this, and we are investigating this. There are a number of cases where people have raised this issue with us, and our tier 3s are exploring them directly. So if you have that situation, please let me know, or please let us know. And I would say, while I'm absolutely, you have my email address, you can use my email address. Please do go to the contact center first, because that's the only way we know that we can register a case, we can go through the process, we know what advice we've given to you. It will always be escalated to me if it needs to be, but actually on this point of the EORIs, please let me know, and we'll feed that into the system, and you'll get a tier 3 to help you with this issue.
Yeah, and just a bit of feedback there. We do use the contact center on, often, and the guys are really sort of great in their responses. So thanks for that. Next question is, we want our customs broker to perform this activity on our behalf. They are best equipped to do this. How are you as TSS going to accommodate this? I think this.
Yeah, this is. I know we've had lots of discussions about this. The issue is, first of all, lots of customs brokers are right now doing declarations on behalf of their customers, but we are conscious that the way they have to do that is they need the EORI numbers of their customers, and then it goes back to the customer. And any trader wants to get out of the way. They want to let their customs intermediary do the whole thing. The issue we have is that we're an indirect representative, and we're an indirect representative because of our Northern Ireland. So we're a Northern Ireland entity. While I'm conscious that there are waivers with respect to the GB side of things, with respect to the indirect representative, if you're using somebody else's CFSP authorization, that does not apply to Northern Ireland. Because the UCC rules apply to Northern Ireland. That said, and the issue therefore becomes, if I'm an intermediary, do I automatically become an indirect representative because I'm putting information onto an indirect representative? So this is the issue that we do need to address. But we are addressing it. It is one of those things that we are trying to investigate how we can make this easier for intermediaries to use the system on behalf of their customers. So there's no sort of view in TSS that we don't want this to happen. We do. We want to make it easy for people, but we just need to cover off this legal liability issue first. But I'm in the process, Des, of working with our team and with HMRC on how we can make that work.
Great. Maybe that sort of almost runs into the next two questions, and I can link the two of them in the interests of time. It says, while we believe TSS has been really engaging and does its best to provide guidance and support, the rollout to industry has been putrid. Firstly, most didn't realize that this was a two-stage process. Now that we realize it is a two-stage process, you are preventing the experts we normally employ from participating in the process, and you are insisting on a laborious manual process for UK businesses to remain compliant. We simply don't have the resource to comply. You need to make this closer to a traditional brokerage process if you are wanting compliance. And just link that to the next one, which is, while a supplementary declaration is a legal requirement, TSS systems requirements are preventing businesses from meeting this must be legal requirement in time. And it is a TSS matter. I think this is responding to what you said earlier. And it is a TSS matter as you are acting as an indirect representative. So I think this is just a frustration coming out as to how
So
do we involve their broker.
Yeah. So I would say that most of the complaints about the supplementary declaration, the data fields and the requirements, I would say maybe 40% of that is the process itself. There are a lot of traders who, as the first question suggested, thought that they could just do an SFD, get over the frontier, and not do anything else, and that's not legally compliant, as we said constantly in all of our presentations. I think probably 40% of it are questions, very legitimate questions, like the one we got at the beginning about why do I have to do all this if it's a not at risk movement, if it's entirely within the customs territory of the UK, and that's a very legitimate question. And I think there is work being done, on trying to see if there might be simplifications. For example, and this is one that we are testing with traders now, which is, and it's fully UCC compliant. It's an Article 177 bulking, where we're producing a stencil that would make it a lot easier for people to bulk commodity codes at the level of the highest commodity code tariff. But of course, if you're UKTS and you don't have to worry about a tariff, then that doesn't matter to you. So the combination of the UK trader scheme and Article 177 bulking is a really good way of simplifying what you have to do at the supplementary declaration stage. So there's lots of things like that I think are possible. That is certainly we're exploring all of those things to make that a lot easier for people to do. In terms of further, and I think so that's 40% of it, and I think there's about 20% of it is the portal is not as intuitive as it could be, and we recognize that. I mean, we take that. That's why we did the things over the weekend that we did. We continue to do those, and so examples of making the portal more intuitive. For example, making the AI code field mandatory so you couldn't miss the NIREM. A lot of traders were just missing the NIREM, not completing it. Things like that will help people pop up. We do quite a lot of pop-ups now on the portal that didn't exist before, which is an obvious and intuitive way of helping people fill in their declarations in real time. I think this intermediary approach of trying to get intermediaries to be able to use the system more effectively is something definitely worth us exploring, and we are exploring it now. So stay tuned for how that develops.
I think sort of please chat to us about that, Shankar, because we do have a lot of the brokers that are that are wanting to get involved in this process, and the traders, our members, are wanting to remain compliant, and so I think it would be something sort of great to that we could work on together. Just of the time here, and I did say in the last year, COVID-19 has dominated our very existence. It is a year today since the Prime Minister announced our first lockdown, and we've all been impacted by COVID in so many different ways. I'd like to share my personal condolences with any and everyone touched by this terrible pandemic, and if we could therefore all observe a 60-second silence to show the respect to everyone we have lost during the pandemic, and to support those who are in mourning. So I will switch this off for 60 seconds, and if we could all observe that 60-second silence. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Shankar, I think that question and answer, the question and answers that we have done in the Q&A section in the chat box has worked extremely well. I know we did run sort of a little bit over, but we had this sort of big question and answer session at the end. So I think that has fitted in perfectly with everything else. I do hope that we haven't upset Tony and Kevin by making them hold on to start. But I think that sort of plays perfectly into where we are now. And if I could introduce Tony Smith, former head of UK Border Force, and Kevin Franklin, recently former director of customs transformation at HMRC. Gentlemen, the virtual floor is now yours.
Well, thank you, Des, and good afternoon, everybody. And of course, we understand why you would want to spend more time on discussing the intricacies and difficulties of the implementing the Trader Support Service, because clearly that's a very, very important initiative for HM government, for the Border Force and for HMRC. So some of you may remember at the last ACITA National in November, I did come on to talk a little bit more widely about what's going on in the UK Border Force and perhaps wider across Whitehall on the UK border, rather than specifically upon the challenges of Northern Ireland and the customs challenges. So I am a former head of the Border Force and now a global border security consultant, and I was a member of the Alternative Arrangements Commission that looked at the Irish border with Shankar and others when we were trying to figure out how we would manage the customs controls in that area. I'm just going to hand over briefly to my former colleague and friend, Kevin Franklin. Kevin, would you just like to say hello to everybody?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Kevin Franklin. I up until October of last year, I was a civil servant and retired after 43 years of public service, most of that working in and around customs or the border. And in the final 4 years of my career, I led the major programs to make the significant changes to the platforms for customs declarations and for safety and security and RoRo.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm delighted to have Kevin here this time because, sparing his blushes, he is far, far better equipped to talk about customs and goods than I am. I was the head of the Border Force, but most of my career was spent more in border security and people movements, immigration and such like. And Kevin was actually on my board when I was head of the Border Force and was my lead official on customs responsibility liaison with HMRC. So we've got quite a lot of experience between us about what's been going on. I just wanted to talk to you about some of the major challenges that we're seeing in the UK at the UK border at the moment. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, before I get on to this, there are three things that you've probably seen in the media, particularly challenging from the UK border's point of view right now. The first one is the COVID pandemic, and we're all watching to see what's going to happen, whether the border will open again or stay shut, and how we protect our communities from importation of new strains of COVID, whilst at the same time trying to get the aviation sector going more generally again. That's really hit the Border Force very, very hard, because not only do our own officers suffer, of course, they're a frontline agency and they're suffering from it themselves and having to work in special conditions, but it is really, really difficult for them to introduce new requirements on all passengers to complete health declarations and health passports and so on, against the backdrop where really they haven't got the legislative authority. This isn't a policy that's really been around for some time now in terms of protecting health of the country. So you need to bear in mind when you see a Border Force officer there, that's all pretty new to us and is still, I think, the policy in formation and changing every week. You can watch the news every week to find out what the latest regulations will be about COVID and travel. The second problem is the migrant crisis, which you may have heard about or seen about, particularly maritime irregular migration across the English Channel. A new sovereign borders bill that's just being drafted and about to be laid, and I've given evidence in Parliament on this. And lots of other commentators talking about, can we actually get back control, I think, which is what the Brexit debate was all about, of our borders, and stop irregular migration in this way. And the border force, obviously a lot of them are involved in Kent now, trying to work on the protection of our coastline down in that part of the world. And so with that and what's going on at the ports for COVID, although traffic's really, really low, they've got a couple of big challenges, but I'm not here to talk about either of those. I did, however, want to get them in because I just wanted to give you an idea of the bandwidth that the border force has and some of the challenges that it's facing more widely, because everything we're talking about here today is actually about Brexit. And it's about the post-Brexit challenges and the ending of free movement. And when Kevin and I were in service in the border force, of course, we had free movement between the UK and the EU, both for people and for goods, and now we don't. And that's really why we're having this conference, particularly in the context of goods movements across the Irish Sea. It is entirely as a result of the new requirement of ending free movement, and of course the Republic of Ireland remaining in the EU, the UK and Northern Ireland not, creating all these complicated frameworks, if you like, policy frameworks, those legal frameworks and technical frameworks about, well, how do we manage moving, keeping things moving in that environment. The one thing I would say about the Irish situation, insofar as I've been concerned personally, is we do have the common travel area that has remained pretty well untouched. And there is an agreement between the two islands that people can continue to move freely between Great Britain, Northern Ireland and Ireland under the common travel area provisions, including third country nationals. So we aren't at the moment facing the same kinds of technical challenges you're facing in the movement of goods through customs and customs unions because of the common travel area. But that's not to say that there aren't some significant changes coming up on the UK border. So there are three main ones that I wanted to talk to you about. The first one is, I don't know if you've seen this, but there is a border 2025 strategy that's been written. That was in formation for a long, long time last year and was finally published on the 17th of December, just gone 2020, by the Cabinet Office after a very, very long consultation, talking about what we think our border will look like in 5 years' time. And I'm going to just run you through some of the visionary aspects of that and what the government would like to see the border looking like in 5 years' time, and how we are trying perhaps to help that in what we're trying to do to deliver that strategy. I'm going to just touch on people controls as well, because I know that you guys are primarily focused on trade and goods, but there are some issues relating to people, movement of people, that I think you need to know about if you don't already. And then I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who's going to take you through a little bit more about the specific customs challenges that have arisen as a result of Brexit. So, I mean, if you do get a chance to read the 2025 strategy, the highlights of it, the main transformations that we're talking about are quite ambitious, in fact, very ambitious. To deliver over a what is now a less than 5 year framework. But I think it's worth knowing that these things are going on, at least so that you can understand the broader context in which we're working. So the first thing is that we're looking at a coordinated approach to border design and delivery. And so the ambition is to have a border design authority, which is going to have a complete look at the way we've actually designed our borders and the way they're set up, and an innovation hub as part of that. So there's a lot of interest in Whitehall right now on innovation. And I suppose, the Trader Support Service is a good example of innovation in that, it's data driven and it's much more about getting data onto digital systems. The movement reference numbers and this goods vehicle movement systems that we're setting up are all new, very new. So of course we're going to get teething problems, but the ambition in the strategy is to continue to drive innovation and technology through our ports of entry to facilitate the movement of both genuine people and goods, but also to give our teams the opportunity to intervene where they need to, where there is some form of mischief or misalignment with regulatory requirements. The second thing is not new, I don't think, and Kevin will know very much about this, about the idea of collection, assurance and the use of border data. I know he spent a good deal of time working in HMRC on this. I'm sure it's a challenge that's arisen, well, I know it is, listening to the conversation this morning, But the ambition is to create this single window, this single trade window, and to integrate government and supply data into one system on the goods side, and also on the people side. We already get advanced passenger information on everybody now coming in and out of the UK, but to make better use of that on other air, not just air modes, but also on our rail and ferry routes. So we know what's coming at us, and we can risk assess people and goods before they arrive at our actual physical border, and then streamline and clear those that are already pre-cleared more quickly. And that will require a lot of work in government to build this single platform or trade window to enable that data to be properly and accurately provided and analysed. I've mentioned new process at the ports, including an investment in technology. I won't dwell on the inland processing centres and some of the changes, because Kevin can talk about that under the border operating model. But there is going to be a strong push towards more automation, automated border controls for people, passport gates, e-passport gates and biometrics for goods. We're looking at models of seamless drive-through borders that we've seen exist in North America. There's a lot of work going on the US-Mexican border, on a drive-through border where you don't have to stop and at a kiosk and collect up all the passports from yourself and the wife and kids and hand it through to somebody and then wait while they're checked put in a slot to check them. But that data and is all submitted in advance, and the vehicle and the people can be recognized in a drive-through scenario. So there is an endorsement in the strategy that they want to go in that direction. There's quite a lot of work to be done, but innovation again is very relevant there. And I won't dwell on free ports either. We've run a separate seminar on free ports. We do have a lot of conversations about free ports, but I do think that is very relevant too, about what we're talking about, special economic zones and how they might play in to the tapestry. And there's already been a number of ports that have been designated as applications for free port status that the government's working on, which is also relevant to the strategy. One thing that's been very strong that we've been lobbying for quite a lot out here is this idea of segmentation and trusted trader status or trusted traveller status. We think that it's a good time now would be to say, well, look, why can't we have specific, routes for people that are compliant, that are able to give us all everything we need by way of data and so on, and regulatory information ahead of time? Can we not create special, faster clearance methods for those that are trusted? And that was one of the recommendations we put forward under alternative arrangements. That has been included in the strategy, including more upstream measures to counter illegal entry and non-compliance. You'll be pleased to know there is a promise to work much more closely with intermediaries and alongside more efficient and resilient border checks and better guidance for travellers and traders. And again, I think this is a good example of an attempt to at least to work more closely with intermediaries in designing the border of the future. And I hope that the TSS is probably a stepping stone at least towards that ambition. And a much more strategic approach to international border management, because borders are two-way streets. And I had the privilege of being Director of Ports in Canada and in the UK during my career, and I know very well that your borders will work much better if you have collaboration on both sides between the countries on either side of them. So it's really, really important that we have that with our friends in Ireland in terms of what we're trying to do here on facilitations, but also when we're looking at our near neighbours in France and Belgium in ensuring that we can get the ro-ro traffic and keep the ro-ro traffic moving. We want to be working very, very closely with them, even though we're no longer part of the same customs union. So next slide, please. So that's really the main areas of the Border 2025 strategy. I just did want to talk to you briefly about people, because of course the ending of free movement isn't just about customs, but it does mean a change to our immigration laws. And so what the government have done, have said to all of those European passport holders, European citizens, including EEA and Swiss passport holders, look, if you want to stay here, then that's okay. You weren't to know that Brexit was coming. If you want to, and all other things being equal, you're a serious criminal or there are any other problems with you, then you can register to do that. But you must register to do that. And I always never miss the opportunity when I'm out there in media like this to remind people the deadline for that is the 30th of June 2021, which isn't very, very far away. Home Office have had problems in the past. You may have heard about the Windrush issues where lots and lots of people have been living here for a great many years but didn't have anything to show that they had permission to work or to stay in this country, and fell foul of the administration. So I've been very vocal in saying, you know, we really need to get the message out there. It's really, really important that you do. If you have got a European passport, and Irish, I hasten to add, are exempt. So British and Irish passports are not relevant to this, but any other form of a passport, people are going to need to have a permission to stay. Now, it's very easy to apply online, and we've now processed over 5 million applications for EU citizens to remain in the UK. It's done simply by, as an app on a mobile phone, uploading passport data online, and you will get there's no card or there's no token or anything, but you will then be registered as somebody who is entitled to stay in the UK, and that process is still ongoing. But if you want to bring a worker in now from the EU, like a new worker who's not already here, then you do need to apply for a license, a sponsorship license to do that. And I think many employers have really realised this yet, because up till now you haven't had to do that for EU workers. You could just take them on and bring them in at will. But now there is a requirement to get a license, and that means a lot of employers who've never been in this area before are now having to apply for sponsorship licenses to do that. And after the 1st of July 2021, then EU citizens will no longer be able to work here without a permission, and employers will have to demonstrate that they've checked the credentials of their EU employees in the same way as they do their non-EU employees before they hire them, and can show evidence that that check has been done and that person has registered to stay in the country. So there's quite a lot going on in the people movement space, which also comes under the jurisdiction of the Border Force. So if you do want any more information about people in particular, about any of these requirements for right to work checks or sponsor licensing for your EU workforce after the 1st of July, please do get in touch. We can offer you specific services on that. So I think that's quite enough from me now, because I'm going way off where you all came into this event, and take you back home a little bit closer to customs, and hand over to my friend Kevin, who is going to talk to you a bit more about goods movements and international trade. Kevin, over to you.
Many thanks, Tony. So Tony asked me to talk to you about some of the challenges that were faced and continue to be faced by HMRC as we continue on this Brexit journey. But before I get into some of that, I thought would be sensible to set the scene a bit. And these are some facts from the UK border strategy that Tony has already mentioned. And I suspect strongly this is not new to this audience, but I think it is really worth restating the importance of international trade to the UK economy. And clearly one of the reasons why trade has been central to the negotiations between the UK and the EU as we left the European Union. And these are figures I think that come out of the Department of Transport, BEIS and HMRC. But we are looking at a significant amount of freight, more than 380 million tonnes of freight handled by seaports, 2.5 million tonnes of freight handled by airports, and 1.3 million tonnes of freight that goes through the Channel Tunnel. And the value of this freight is significant. It's worth £1.4 trillion over a 12-month period. Imports covering off 718 billion and exports 689 billion. So we are talking big numbers. And from that freight over a 12-month period, HMRC manages to collect £35 billion of revenue. Most of that revenue is VAT on import, but 3.4 billion of that is customs duty. So again, significant numbers. Next slide, please, Kevin. So again, before I get into the specific challenges that HMRC has faced, I think it's just worth recapping on the GB EU operating model. Obviously, we've heard comprehensive presentations from Shankar and previously from Ellie on the Northern Ireland protocol. But during the course of last year, the government did decide that post-transition period changes would be implemented through a series of stages. 3 stages were set out. These changes are documented in the border operating model, which can be found on gov.uk. And those 3 stages started with stage 1, a core model for GB EU, implemented in January of this year. Stage 2 then goes on to some additional requirements for SBS checks. Now that was due to happen initially in April. That timeline has now changed. And then finally you get to stage 3, which had previously timed for July of this year, where easements end and we're into a full-blown operating model. The government did make a statement, Michael Gove made a statement on the 11th of March to change these timelines, and I will cover that off a little bit when I go through the slides. So stage 1 has already happened, of course, and obviously the transition period has ended, which means we're out of the customs union and out of the single market. This does mean that there is a requirement for customs declarations and for non-control goods. These are catered through the simplified declaration process or entry into declarants records with a deferred declaration scheme that allows for supplementary declarations to be submitted up to 6 months after import. At this stage, there's no requirement for safety and security declarations for imports from GB to the GP from the EU, but we do require full declarations on control goods. HMRC implemented postponed accounting for VAT on import by way of a facilitation to support particularly small businesses with cash flow. I won't go into Northern Ireland Protocol Trade Support Service because you've had, as I say, comprehensive presentations on both those issues already. I did think it was worth mentioning the Common Transit Convention. 2 reasons really. One is just to remind everybody that the UK is now part of the Common Transit Convention in its own right. But there is no staged approach to the use of community transit, and traders using community transit must follow all transit procedures. Next slide, please, Kevin. Just to complete the picture on the stages. So stage 2, now these are additional requirements for sanitary and phytosanitary checks. They were initially due to be implemented from April of this year, but as you were seeing from the Michael Gove statement, these are now being moved to October, and actually some checks have been moved to January of next year, and then some further checks moved to March 22. The October changes really are for SBS checks for products of animal origin and regulated plants and plant products. This is where there will be a requirement for pre-notifications and the relevant health documentation. Physical checks on SBS goods at border control posts is now being moved to the 1st of January next year, and then checks at border control posts on live animals and low risk plants and plant products has been moved to March of next year. Stage 3 brings an end to the staged approach to implementing the full-blown GB EU operating model. This was due to be completed in July of this year, but that has now been moved to January of next year. And at that point, of course, traders will need to make declarations at the point of importation, pay the relevant tariffs for all controlled and non-controlled goods. Options such as the use of deferred declaration scheme will then come to an end. Other easements will be removed as well, although as Ellie said earlier, this is constantly being reviewed by HMRC as they have their collaboration with industry on all of these changes. Things like statements of proof of origin, which are not currently required, will then be required when we get to stage 3. Safety and security declarations then will be required for movements from the EU to GB, and the goods vehicle movement system will be implemented in full for imports, exports, as well as for transit. The details of all of this is clearly laid out in the border operating model that, as I've said earlier, is in gov.uk. If I could move to the next slide, please. So these are, it's not an exhaustive list, but this is to really give you a sense of the challenges that HMRC faced, well, effectively from the point of the referendum in 2016, and clearly continue to face these challenges as we go on over the next 6 to 12 months. I think the first point I want to make is technology. It is an extraordinary amount of change that HMRC has had to make to hit its technology platforms. I mean, significant changes, not just to the systems, but to its architecture as well. Changes have had to be made to over 30 systems that HMRC own that have a role to play in goods movement across the border. But there are 4 major platforms, customs declarations. So big changes have had to be made both to chief the existing customs declaration system and to CDS, which is the new customs declaration service platform. We also had to make significant changes to the import clearance system to accommodate safety and security changes, particularly the increase in the volume of safety and security declarations. We had to introduce the goods vehicle movement system, and this is primarily to support the need to be able to connect the movement of the goods to customs declarations, particularly in non-inventory linked ports. And we've also had to make changes to the UK new computerized transit system to accommodate some changes that were required to be able to comply with the CTC. Readiness has been an important and continues to be an important and significant challenge, not just for HMRC, obviously for the trade as well. And I think that, again, others will have a view on this, but I think for me, there are 3 main factors why readiness continues to be a difficult challenge for us all. One is tight timelines. We have seen on a number of occasions the need to look at right to left plans. So we have a target date and somehow we need to fit all of the activities in the time up to that target date. And for all of those project managers that are on the call, you will understand that's not always the best way to do things. I mean, for example, when Article 50 was triggered in March 2017, there was a 2-year period. So we were already working back from March 2019. And then we've had other right to left plans that we've had to look at as well. I think the second factor, and Des mentioned this in his introduction, is just trying to maintain or provide as much clarity as possible on detailed requirements during the course of a series of negotiations. And obviously the negotiation for the withdrawal agreement, the negotiation that ended up in the trade and cooperation agreement, but also actually we did have to negotiate our way into the Common Transit Convention to enable the UK to be a member in its own right after leaving the European Union. And then I think the third factor, which is an obvious one, is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. For government departments specifically, the challenges have been around legislation. There has been a huge programme of legislation change that all government departments, but especially HMRC, had to run through Parliament, both primary and secondary legislation. HMRC has supported the government negotiating team in its negotiations during the course of the withdrawal agreement, TCA, and the Common Transit Convention. I've already mentioned the IT systems. There has had to be infrastructure change, and HMRC has had oversight of some of those infrastructure change, particularly support Ro-Ro traffic in certain ports around the country. And it has had to make changes to its own operating environment. And by that, there have had to be new recruits coming in to increase the numbers to be able to support all of this change. Lots of training that has had to be implemented, and actually, to be to blunt, HMRC had to rapidly expand its customs expertise. It is a department that is proud to boast a number of customs experts, but when we started looking at the volume of change, when you compared the number of customs experts in an organisation that had over 60,000 people in it, it was relatively small. And so there needs to be a rapid introduction of more people, and we need to bring them up to speed very quickly. The trade challenge, the reason why I put the trade challenge, even though I'm talking about the challenges from an HMRC perspective, is that, and again, I think this was evident in Des's introduction. In this industry, you can't separate government from trade challenges. We all live in a very interconnected ecosystem when it comes to the movement of freight. And during the course of my time at HMRC, and I can see that this is still ongoing. And by the way, I also support what Des said about Ellie Patterson as being an extraordinarily gifted individual and a fantastic voice of industry inside of HMRC. I've seen that from first-hand experience. A very strong messages from the border industry and indeed from businesses, buyers and sellers, that there has been insufficient time to deliver the change necessary. There has been additional cost burden. There has been an impact on existing business plans and existing priorities. So we do need to remember that businesses have a business to run. It's not just about implementing the changes that come out of government. Significant education and training programs have had to be put in place, both in-house for organisations and for organisations' customers in their supply chain. And then, of course, when you add COVID to this mix, you can understand why it is good to see that the government has recognised and accepted the pressure on businesses to make the changes within the timescales that had been set out last summer, and the shift of those timelines to provide more time. The third area I wanted to cover was, and this has been touched upon by other speakers already, is intermediary capacity. So the current customs operating model is still heavily dependent upon intermediaries. Something like 90% of traders use or want to use intermediaries. And I have heard trade associations offer an estimate for a need for something like 50,000 agents to be able to cope with the demand. Currently, if you look at the number of badge holders on chief, so those organisations that have the ability to make declaration, it's only around 10,000. So you can see there's a significant gap that would need to be closed. And that lack of capacity is still evident today, which is why, of course, there have been government interventions, not least on the grants that have been made available to support recruitment, training and IT, and of course the trader support service. The next point I wanted to make was around alignment, and although I've described alignment between negotiations and operational delivery, actually I just wanted to cover off a range of alignment tensions, and I suppose it is inevitable. It is inevitable with so many moving parts in an industry, as you all know, that is complex, diverse, and there are many actors involved in supply chains. And of course, we are going through the biggest change in UK trading relationships for decades. But trying to keep government departments, border industry, buyers and sellers aligned is a huge challenge and continues to be a huge challenge, I would imagine, for HMRC and other government departments in a constantly evolving environment. And just by way of examples, when we were looking at trying to keep negotiations that were going on in Brussels and delivery plans in step, that made certainty of requirement very difficult. And then, of course, that has a knock-on impact on you as industry folk when you're trying to ensure that you've got your systems and processes and procedures in place to support your own customers and to support your own business. Even within HMRC, and this is something that John Thompson said to a public accounts committee, actually, so it's not just from me. he was appointed to lead HMRC, this massive operational department, and to transform it. At the time of his appointment, we hadn't had the referendum, and then Brexit came along. And now, of course, over the last year, there's been the pandemic to cope with as well. So HMRC has had to constantly shift its priorities, and the demand that has come out of these various changes on its ability to supply has meant has been extremely flexible when it comes to those shifting priorities. And that's from a policy perspective, an IT perspective, and operational perspective as well. There's also been and continues to be a need to ensure there is alignment with other government departments. HMRC does work hand in glove with other government departments, and by way of example, if you look at DEFRA's automated license verification system, that has a direct link into Chief and to CDS. Tariff content is provided by the DIT, and again, that goes into the tariff shell that's been built in both of those customs declaration platforms. And HMRC owns the policy for customs. Many of the operational things that are done actually on the ground are then done by the border force. So making sure that policy change and that operational direction is in step. On systems, one of the biggest challenges, not the biggest necessarily, or certainly one of the biggest challenges, is that when we were looking at the changes to customs platforms, and this continues to go on, there is a need to ensure that there is alignment with community service providers and with software developers who've got their own bespoke customs packages. And of course, many of those organizations were at different positions in their own delivery life cycles and within their own business priorities. So trying to keep those in step has been a challenge. It's one of the reasons why the migration from Chief to CDS has been extended, I think, several times, because of recognition that there's an awful lot going on. And then, of course, when it comes to freight forwarders, customs agencies and businesses, just making sure that the information about the legislation change, process change and policy changes is up to date, and that everybody is receiving it, has been a huge effort and an exercise when it comes to information campaigns, not just through HMRC, but through the wider government as well. And then finally, because I'm conscious of time, the reason why I put no deal versus deal is this, is that this has made alignment quite tricky. The government has always been very clear that its direction is aiming for a deal, both on the withdrawal agreement and, of course, on the free trade agreement, and they've achieved both of those objectives. But during the course of time from 2016 right way through to the point that the withdrawal agreement was ratified by Parliament, there was a risk on at least 3 occasions, certainly before the election in December 2019, that we could be faced with no deal. March 2019, 12th of April 2019, October in the same year. And this, of course, placed additional stretch on the resources within HMRC as we worked hard and planned for a deal, but we had to prepare those contingencies. And then going back to my earlier point about alignment, that did mean that we had to constantly try and maintain alignment with the various organizations that are operating in this space. So I think I would finish off by saying, and it's something again that Des mentioned in his introduction, I mean, the amount of change that's been implemented since June 2016, both by HMRC, government departments, and of course the industry, is considerable and remarkable. And this can only be achieved through collaboration. Des has lauded the commitment of Ellie Patterson, and quite rightly so, because people like Ellie, and there are many others who work in the HMRC policy space, are genuinely the voice of industry inside of government, and very clear messages that you give to my former HMRC colleagues are presented to senior executives in the department and to ministers as well. And it does make a difference, and it does influence the direction. And you heard some of the easements that Ellie mentioned earlier. This is a direct consequence of that collaboration, which is terribly important. I think where we go next, and this is a personal observation, and that is that there is still a need for HMRC and indeed other government departments to stabilise the border operating model. I think certainly from an HMRC perspective, part of this will be the need to modernise some of their legacy systems. Chief Blissett is a fantastic system. I will say that because I was on the team that wrote the specification for it, did much of the implementation work and led the cutover from its predecessor, DEPS. But come May of this year, it will be 27 years of age, and the technology is just simply not sufficiently flexible to deal with the modern age. But there are other systems within HMRC that will require updating as well before you can get on really to the transformation that we all are looking for, because there is still no doubt, certainly from within HMRC, is there is a need for a digital revolution in the customs space, and certainly wanting to make sure that we get to some of those target objectives that are set out in the UK Border Strategy 2025. The slides we put up on the border operating model, it's worth just finishing there. Lots of detail in this document. I think it still needs to be updated to accommodate some of the changes in timelines. I've not looked at it over the last couple of days, but you should definitely watch out for that. And that, is all I want to say. Thank you.
Kevin, Tony, thank you very, very much. There are a few questions, if you don't mind. The first one is a question for two experts in this area. Are the UK acting legally in terms of international law? There are essentially no border controls for goods moving inwards from the European Union. And what are the chances of a further extension or a further no deal scenario?
Want to go first, Kev, on that one?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Look, one thing that is something that has been a constant in all of this. Any policy change within HMRC or any policy change that a government minister wants to implement absolutely goes through a rigorous scrutiny by the lawyers, and they would not make these easements possible unless it was legally possible. So, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty confident that anything that has been issued is not done to simply provoke any challenge from the European Union. It is a genuine attempt to be able to be compliant with the tenets of the trade agreement that we have in place, but a recognition that, you know, we just do simply need time, and COVID has exacerbated that position. So I am very confident that lawyers would have scrutinised the detail before these extensions were put into the public domain. A chance of extensions, well, you know, I think there would have been a time, if you'd asked me that 6 months ago, the view inside government was, no, these are hard targets. But again, I think the COVID pandemic has had such an impact, as you will all understand, on business, that the government has recognised there is a need to continue to have the dialogue with the industry. And if more time is required, I have no doubt they will consider it. I also, to balance that though with, I have no doubt, and this certainly would have been the case when I was working inside of HMRC, they will be keen to complete this exercise, to have all the post-transformation changes in place, not least because they want to get onto some of the transformation they want to do around customs and border movements.
Des, you're on mute.
Thank you, Tony. And just sort of on that potential no deal scenario, there is sort of a lot of concern that the European Union might not ratify the trade agreement. I mean, essentially, where does that leave us? Is that not back in sort of a no deal type scenario?
I'll have a first go at that, and then Kev might want to come in. But one of the things that sadly I do as a border security consultant, management consultant these days, I read these things, and I don't know if you've actually read the withdrawal agreement or the free trade agreement, but what a lot of the key crunch issues have been kicked into the long grass. There is a proposal to set up a whole raft of cross UK EU committees and groups around each of the chapters to determine the level of, the detail of what will go on. So I think, it just kind of feels to me, having actually read the documents and been challenged on a few times, that there is still quite a lot of work to be done in formulating the future state, if you like, of our relationship with the EU. I think we have got a deal, but I think in getting to that deal, a lot of stuff was kind of kicked into the long grass. And I suppose one of the advantages is the joint committee, with the Ireland issue, where it was clearly a hugely difficult problem to resolve. The Irish border challenges and deliver Brexit, and therefore, a joint committee was established, which is still working very hard, I know. And a lot of the questions that are coming up places like this, Des, are actually being put before that committee, as you know. So I don't think we're out the woods yet. I mean, we have got a deal, we have got a relationship, but I don't think we can say it's all done and dusted and that's the end of it. I don't know, Kev, if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I support all of that, Tony. I think the thing that I would add is that I can say that there is a genuine, deep-seated desire for both the European Union and the UK negotiators to resolve these issues. And people, I know we see it in the news, but I can testify that people have been working extraordinarily long hours to ensure that there is resolution to these issues. I suppose from an international trade perspective, one thing that we are sure of anyway is that we are out of the customs union, we are out of the single market. So there is a need now to have customs declarations when we are trading between the UK and the European Union. So the changes that are being implemented now are going to happen whatever is the outcome of these continuing negotiations.
Thank you. The next one is, your 2025 strategy is great. Proper prior planning is what we need. But what we do need to do is to get things sorted right now. How do we go about getting the short-term focus shifted? Personally, I think that's a bit unfair, but it is a question.
So Kevin and I both come from a world of the civil service where we are answerable to our ministers. And I spent a lot of time talking to ministers in my department. My parent department was a Home Office, not HMRC actually, about advising them. And I think one of the big challenges that I learned along that way was that setting out policy, particularly public policy, is one thing that comes quite easily to them. What comes less easily to them is the practical delivery of those policies. And our job as civil servants was to explain both, to be politically impartial, because we've got a politically impartial civil service in this country, but to say, well, Minister, if you really want to do that, if you really want to stop COVID coming into the UK, you're going to have to close the border. And when you talk about closing the border, how exactly do you intend to do that? And how do you intend to identify caveats or gaps in that? Because you can't, well, if you completely close the border, you're cutting off all our supply chains. And I think these are the problems that we're wrestling with now, or our successors are, Des, in Whitehall, is, that ministers have been, the Brexit debate was the most heated one in my lifetime in British politics. And still runs on, and there are divisions, no doubt, within the government and across Parliament on what ought to be done, what shouldn't be done, and the sheer plethora of new initiatives and new policy demands upon the organisation don't really take account of the organisational structure or capability to do it. So, I mean, on my primary function at the border, be careful what I say here, because I don't want to antagonise anybody. But the primary function of the border was to facilitate, as best I could, the movement of people and goods across our borders, because that was generally, especially by all the governments I worked, to be the right thing to do, but to intercept those that were harmful or dangerous. And what we've seen now is a whole raft of new regulatory requirements coming in because we've left the EU. But I think sometimes we miss the point that the starting point that we've just left, if you like, was equality on a lot of these issues. And I think that gets lost sometimes in the political, we need to take back control. Well, actually, you know, we were already aligned on a lot of things. And what really was it that needed to be done or needs to be done to fix the border? And you've seen this very, very clearly in the Northern Ireland context. And I'm afraid we're going to see it. I mean, COVID in a way has saved the border a little bit because volumes are right down. But the new regulatory requirements that we're all being asked to make at our borders could have a severe impact upon flow and upon that vision. So I'm afraid I haven't got a simple answer for that, other than that my mission would be, were I still there, would be to continue to deliver on that mandate, to try and make sure that legitimate trade and legitimate people flow freely across our borders, and then incrementally to introduce the regulatory changes necessary to deliver the desired policy outcome. But it's not an easy job at all. And I'm sure Kevin will attest to that because he's been there much more recently than I have.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I suppose what I'd add is this: is that it's the reason why, again, this was a personal observation, is that I think that there is a need to stabilise this border operating model first. So to be able to really transform services, and this is brilliant. This is a brilliant question. Is that short-term focus does need to be addressed, because without that stabilisation of some of the platforms, it is not easy to be able to do the transformation that is required. And in some of that, there will be some modernisation that have to be done on legacy systems within government departments. I have no doubt. But I suppose actually, in a sort of very practical way, Des, in terms of how can industry folk get more involved? Of course, you sit on something called the Joint Customs Consultative Committee. That is one way of influencing some of this. But more specifically, I know that inside of HMRC, its delivery programs do quite a lot of work to bring industry reps right inside the tent. So CDS, for example, has had industry representatives sitting on an internal HMRC program board, which is unusual for most government-led programs. And this has made a difference because those trade representatives sitting inside these decision-taking bodies have had a significant influence and continue, I used the phrase earlier, but continues to be the voice of industry around some of these short-term challenges, which are nobody underestimates. I can assure you.
Thank you. I think the next question is asking you and Tony to sort of solve some operational problems. The discharging of T1 transit documents has become extremely problematic, especially for the movement of goods through non-inventory ports like Dover, and in brackets and bold, and don't tell me Dover is an inventory port. I don't know if you guys are sort of aware of what has been happening, where transporters have been bringing goods into the UK. They've been flowing through Dover. People were unaware that they were moving under transit, have taken them into the EIDR process, and then afterwards suddenly find out that they've moved under transit. And we are now liaising with Customs and Border Force to try and get these T1 documents discharged. And there is sort of no process that Customs and Border Force have put in place to facilitate this. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts or suggestions on that.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that I wouldn't dare say that Dover is an infantry-linked port, although to be fair, there are some infantry-linked movements, as we know, Des, but it is primarily a non-infantry-linked port, and I'm not aware of that specific problem. But I now that you described it, I can see why that is a problem, and I think it is absolutely have the conversation with the Border Force directly, but HMRC should be coming in supporting that as well. I think these, the questioner who said, what about the short-term focus? Here's a really good example of a short-term focus on a problem that needs to be fixed now.
Thank you. And then I suppose one final question before we have run out of time. With the mention of automated border controls, one has to ask why at immigration it is usual that over half of the auto desks don't work. Surely they have to sort this out before they can work on anything else.
Yeah, that probably is one of my babies, because I was instrumental in actually getting e-gates into the British airports for a long period of time, but it's quite a complicated structural setup between the airport authority and the border force and the technology providers that exist in different parts of our border. And so I share those frustrations. There's been many a time when I've come into the country outside of the and wondered why, and asked why publicly as a former head of the border force, asked why on earth those gates were not open at times when they were not working, apparently not working when they should do. But I think it is important that we understand what the e-gates do, and that they, they're not entirely standalone. There are people behind them that actually have to monitor them and make sure that they work properly and that they maintain the integrity of the border. And so, there is a strategy in place to try, and I think they're going to have to be replaced down the line with new systems. Those e-gates only work for e-passport holders over the age of 12, and they were designed entirely for people that enjoy free movement in and out of the country. And even then, they haven't delivered as much as they could have done. What I'm really quite keen on is there is going to be a new electronic traveller authority brought in, Des, in this country in 2023. If anyone's ever been to America and got an ESTA, you will know what that means. But what that does effectively is says that before you travel, you can upload a whole load of information about yourself and send it to your port of arrival. We don't really have that here, but I think that's what the border vision articulates. And that means that we could look at all kinds of new systems. And one of the things I do in addition to this is I chair the International Border Management and Technologies Association. A lot of our members are coming up with technologies that can actually capture your biometric. You can have an app on your phone, you can have a contactless border, and you won't actually need to stop at all, even at an e-gate, if you are a pre-approved traveller arriving at the border. So there's an awful lot of work going on in the seamless traveller space, a lot of it COVID friendly, so doing away with paper boarding passes and even passports with a digital travel credential are all on the horizon that our e-gates were never designed for. So the thing about automated border controls is they always seem to be playing catch up, but I think we should give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back because we actually do in this country move more people through e-gates than any other country does in the world. And so we have got a good story to tell on these, but yes, there are clearly glitches in frustrations about when they're working and when they're not working, when they're open. And really, I think longer term, a review of how in the context of the 2025 strategy we've described, which pushes the checks upstream prior to boarding, we can actually see airports of the future where people will simply be able to walk straight through and subject to some kind of a biometric check straight off into the baggage hall and beyond. But that won't work for everybody. There's, we have to start looking at segmentation and working out, well, who does qualify to come in quickly that way. And for us, being from a law enforcement background, there's a quid pro quo that will always be based upon the amount of data that you are prepared to share with us before you travel. And if you're not prepared to do that, then I'm afraid there's always going to be a wait at the border.
Kevin, thank you very, very much. Looking at the time, your timing is absolutely perfect as well. So a big thank you to you and to all the panelists and to all that have attended today. There is so much to take from the session, so don't forget that the session is recorded and the recording is available on the website. Keep watching the website and Kevin will keep you updated on the NI Republic of Ireland Transit session next week. So goodbye from me, and I look forward to seeing you all in the very near future. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Dinesh.
Hi, Kevin. All right?
Yes, very good. I thought that was excellent.
Yeah, I was just thinking that you're still going to let people on, okay?
Yeah, I'm just going to remove them. Hang on, Dinesh. I'll remove them. Hold on.
Yeah, thanks. Good, you're back on. Is Des around?
I thought that was the best one we've had so far.
Yeah, this was good, very good. You know,
Great speaker.
we didn't even get a break for tea.
No, I know. And I was bursting to go to the loo.
No, I switched off and had to go to the loo. So I said, I'm going to go quick.
What the problem is, I'm not sure if they want the next slide, so I just had to stand and just wait and wait.
Maybe you should put a robot in your place and say, okay, press the button.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I thought that was excellent.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I think the one next week was only sort of decided the time next week. So what I'll do is I already sent a thing to Shankar, and he's already going to get, and he's one of the ministers going to join in as well. But I'll come back with more details this afternoon once I've sort of sorted out who's going to be there and how we're going to do it. Okay, so I'll talk to Des and I'll get back to you on that.
Is that going to be more of an interactive event?
Yes, it is. It is, because I think there's a lot of issues with the transit thing.
Yeah.
And it will be mainly aimed at the the transport companies or people who are doing logistics, right? And see how I can't see you, Kevin. Sorry, your camera is off.
Yeah.
Ah, that's better. Yeah. So it's something that it's been lingering, but until late last night I spoke to Des, and yeah, he sent me something in the morning, so I then got the date and the time now. So it's going to be Tuesday the 30th from 10 to 12. Okay.
How many people do you think we will get on that one?
I think what we'll have to do is today, because once I've spoken to Des, I need to get back to you, and that needs to go very quickly on the website.
Yeah, yeah.
Get people to come on board, because obviously it is going to be targeted to people who are going to be more interested in trying to get their transit thing sorted and what they need to do and what subjects or sort of the discussion points they want to bring on with all the issues. So this is where we're going to do is that's why we want to do an interactive. So maybe it'll be all the logistics companies. Maybe Des will have few. So let me talk to him this afternoon. He's going to give me a quick call. Yeah. And once we know, we'll start getting the thing done today, because we haven't got much time between now and Tuesday.